Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Tim. And good morning, everyone. And thank you again for participating, as Tim said, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to be with us. I'm going to be discussing scheduling requests and rent increase requests with you all today, which are two very important documents that we have out there that we need to make sure as we are submitting those documents that they are being submitted correctly. So to get started, we're going to start off with our scheduling requests. First, we'd like to just list a lot of our scheduling request errors that we're getting. The scheduling request is basically the form that's submitted by you, the landlord, to get us to come out and do your inspection. If that form is incomplete and missing information, we cannot come out, we cannot schedule that inspection. So we just wanted to point a few of those things out to you. First of all, one of the things that we see consistently is the resident contact information is submitted. Again, the scheduling appointment request form is a 2-page form, and many times we don't get both pages back. That first page has resident contact information on it, as well as at the bottom where you start entering the information about the unit that's going to be submitted. Again, many times the landlord information is missing for the new unit. Addresses are incomplete. We need to know whether it's avenue, street, road, circle, or place. It must be designated, it must have a U.S. Postal Service designation. As we're putting the information into the system, we're checking with the post office to ensure that the address on the scheduling request is the address that's listed with the Postal Service. So you want to make sure that you put the designation there. Apartment numbers are often omitted. We have to have the apartment number. And then the hours that the unit is available for inspection. We have a lot of apartment complexes, and sometimes landlords are not available during certain hours of the day. So we need to know on that form, and we're going to see a form in a few moments, we need to know on that form exactly when that unit will be available for inspection. And the date that the unit is available for inspection is often omitted. Okay. Some of the other issues that we have is that when you're submitting the scheduling request, the unit is not vacant. The unit has to be vacant because we run the information, and if we find that the unit is already occupied, then we will not schedule the inspection. Important information that's used is when the unit was built. You want to make sure that the year the unit was built is not omitted, as well as the square footage. We're doing rent comparables as we're doing this, and we need that information to ensure that we calculate the information properly. The number of bedrooms should be accurate. It'll hold things up when the field agent comes out there. If you've submitted the scheduling request and it says it's a 2-bedroom, and you say it's a 3-bedroom, and the agent comes out and it's a 3-bedroom. So we want to make sure that your bedroom count and your bathroom count is accurate. The type of parking many times is omitted. In the calculation, when we're doing comps, the type of parking has a value, has a monetary value. So if you leave that space blank, we're just going to check that it's open. And if it's open, then that's the least amount of money that's applied to that particular area. So you want to make sure that you want to put, that you want to identify the type of parking. And oftentimes the responsibility of appliances is omitted. You want to make absolutely sure that that's completed. So now what we have is we have an actual scheduling appointment request form, and these are the things that we were talking about here. Many times the landlord will submit the scheduling request, as we mentioned, without this information up here, which is the tenant information. We can't move forward. And as I went through the list, you'll see that all of this information has to be here. Here is where the landlord starts putting in their information about the office hours that they're going to be open, that they'll be available for the inspection. Make sure you put in your phone numbers because many times phone numbers are omitted. The second page is the page where the unit information is mentioned. Remember, we have the street name, the apartment number, very important. When the unit is going to be available for inspection goes here. This is where the unit is built, square footage, and how much rent that you're asking. Just like to mention that any information that Tim just showed you about the website, there's a very valuable tool that we have online that's called, it's in the landlord resources. It's called the rent estimate worksheet. Now, it's not exact, but you know, as part of this program, the tenant has to pay at least 30% of their rent, and they can pay no more than 40%. So this form is used to calculate whether that unit is affordable to the tenant or not. So that rent estimate worksheet actually gives you an opportunity to know whether the rent that you're requesting for the tenant is affordable to that tenant or not. So if you have any questions about the rent estimate worksheet, you can call myself or Quinton, Germany, and our information is at the end of the presentation, but it is a very valuable tool. Here, getting back to the form, I apologize for that break, but we have our bedrooms, we have our bathrooms. Many landlords will list a bath and a half as a 2-bath unit. Make sure that you understand the difference between a bath and a half and a 2-bath unit. Here's where we have the type of parking. Again, this is very important because this has a monetary value in the calculation of the rent comps. You want to make sure that you note any extras that you might have in the complex. Here's where we have our appliances and our utilities. Make sure that each one of these items is circled as you are doing your rent increase request. Again, this information is used to determine whether or not that unit is affordable to the tenant. Okay, so that's it as far as the rent increase request is concerned. That's it as far as the rent increase request is and the presentation. So next we're going to be going to our rent increase request, which is very important to you guys, and we want to make sure that you understand that process. Just a few reminders. We do not require landlords to renew a lease request in order to request an increase, a rent increase. We do not process rent increases if the most recent inspection conducted is in failed status. So if you've recently had an inspection and that inspection failed, we will not process that rent increase request, and we'll send you a letter back and you will have to submit a new rent increase request once that unit has passed inspection. We have a new rent increase request form online in that information that Tim showed you. Please discontinue using the old rent increase request forms and use the new forms in the website that Holly has in the link. My information may be incorrect here, but use the information that Holly put in the link. You must request the effective date of your rent increase on the 1st of the month. Many times we'll get in, you'll be requesting the information like on the 15th of the month. Well, it's not going to be processed on the 15th of the month. It's going to be processed the 1st of the month following, more than likely. Please remember to fill out the form completely. Rent increase request forms are returned if they're not filled out completely, because we can't move forward and do the appropriate rent comparables that we need to do. One of the problems that we find is that landlords are just, that we're just filling out the form, we're not referring to the current lease. So information that's being put on the form is not in accordance with your lease. You want to make sure that you're looking at the current lease as you're filling out the information on the form. Requests cannot be submitted during the first year of the lease or during the lease renewal period. That will cause it to be returned. So if your client is in the first year of their lease or they're in their renewal period, we will not process a rent increase. Rent increases must not be submitted less than 60 days from the requested effective date of the increase, meaning that if it's inside those 60 days, again, you're going to get it returned to you and tell you that it's not meeting the submittal time frame. And you cannot request it more than 120 days from the requested effective date. Rental increases, this first one bullet here is kind of a repetition, but the second bullet, rental increases can be submitted annually as long as that unit continues to meet the rent reasonable criteria. Okay, this is repeated information. I apologize for that. Now, a couple of things that we want to clarify because we see misconceptions about certain items on the rent increase request form. On-site laundry applies to multifamily housing that supplies a laundry facility for resident use. We're seeing rent increase request forms come in where you have on-site laundry checked in a single family house, but you also have washer and dryer connections. So if it's a single family unit or a duplex unit, whatever, and there's a washer dryer connection, you do not have to circle on-site laundry because we're talking about a laundry facility in a multifamily complex. Washer dryer hookups refer to in-unit fixtures for private resident washer and dryers, whether they are supplied by the tenant or the landlord. It doesn't matter who's supplying the washer dryer. What we're asking is, are you supplying the hookups if the tenant wants to have a washer and dryer? Pest control means that the landlord is responsible for pest control regardless of when the need of services arise. We've been noticing that landlords are checking pest control and they only offer the pest control for the first 30 days of the lease. Okay, so if you circle pest control on your rent increase request form, then what that means to us is that you're supplying pest control regardless of when the need arises. Now in units, and this is just something we'd like to point out, in units that have shared walls like apartments, duplexes, fourplexes, triplexes, the agents, if they find an infestation problem, it will be cited as a responsibility to the landlords by the field agent. A fenced yard only applies to houses or duplexes. We're getting rent increase requests in where there's a fence around an apartment complex. That's not what we're talking about, okay? There's another question on there where it says that it's a gated community. So if you have a gated community that allows entrance and that allows entrance to the residents and keeps others out unless they're invited in, then you circle gated community. But for fence yard, it only applies to houses and duplexes. Only circle cable if you are paying for the cable service. Doesn't mean that you're providing that cable service is provided to the unit. That means that you are actually paying for the cable service. Remember that balconies are located on the upper level of the unit on the exterior with access from an upper floor window or a door. We're getting some in where they're calling patios balconies, and we want to make sure that we clarify on that. Now, here's a copy of a rent increase request form. Again, we need the name of the landlord in the complex, correct address, the tenant's name that's going to be occupying the unit. Many times, I don't understand it, but the wrong name will come in on here. You'll have the name spelled wrong of the tenant. Here's where you put the current rent. Here is your new requested rent. And here is where you put the proposed effective date. Remember, it cannot be less than 60 days from submittal and not any more than 40 days, than 120 days. I apologize. Here, state the reason for the increase. It could be taxes. It could be anything, but just make sure that you put the reason that you are requesting the rent increase. This is where we has responsibility of utilities or appliances changed since the contract signing. If they have, we have to schedule a new inspection to come out and redo another contract. Say, for instance, when the tenant moved into the unit, you were supplying the refrigerator. And sometime during that lease, your refrigerator went bad. The tenant said, never mind, I'll put my own in. Well, once that change of appliances happened, we have to come out, you have to notify us, and we have to come out and do an inspection and execute a new contract. Here, important landlord signature, date, phone number, email address, so we can contact you. Here, type of unit, your unit built, important, square footage, important. If these things are omitted, there's many items on here that if they're omitted, it's going to be returned to you. So just make sure you fill out the form completely. Please do not send in multiple requests. If you want to see if it's been received, please just call and ask. But we're getting many where they're being mailed in, they're being faxed in, they're being emailed in, and they're all being put in the system. We have a process, and in order for it to be processed properly, we have the date that it should, the address that the form should be mailed to on the bottom of the form. So please follow those directions and mail it to us. If you are faxing forms, apartment complexes, they must be faxed individually. If you fax them all as a group, when we're getting them into the system, we only see the first one. Unless there's a reason for us to open up that first one, we don't even know the other ones are there. So if you're gonna fax them, you have to fax them individually. But again, we ask that you mail them so they can be acquired into the system properly and they can be processed in the order that they are received. Okay, I'd like to thank you all for indulging me with these few minutes of your time. Here's my contact information. Please free to call me. Please feel free to call me anytime you have any questions. Thank you.
I will attempt to give you a rundown about housing quality standards. This can be a multiple day presentation, but we're going to try to get it taken care of within this time frame. And I appreciate Mr. Love for giving me a little extra time on my presentation to get you guys more information as needed. Okay, dealing with HQS, what you're going to hear with me saying it throughout this presentation, which is housing quality standards. This is going to be the minimum property standards that's been approved by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. I'll start to ad-lib and say HUD and OHFA and HQS today, but I want to give you those factors as well. The goal of Housing Choice Voucher is to provide decent, safe, and sanitary housing at an affordable cost to low-income families. We cannot do this without you guys as landlords. This is a triangle relationship with us, OFA, the tenants, and the landlords, but we actually need you, and we appreciate everything that you do for the families here in Oklahoma. All units that is on our program, the Housing Choice Voucher program, they must meet the HQS performance requirements. That is during the initial part of the intake process for the HQS or during the assisted tenancy throughout the person is there. We have a couple of inspections, which is going to be the initial inspection, and then we have our annual, which is every 2 years. But we also have a tenant request inspection that tenants can also request for an inspection throughout the years. We do inform our tenants to notify the landlords prior to the tenant request of the repairs before they notify us for us to check those repairs. Okay, so here's a couple of protocols that we have for HQS, a couple of manuals, inspection manuals. So we have the Housing Quality Standards Inspection Manual. All these forms are going to be located on the HUD website as well. You can also do a search engine. If you use Google, Yahoo, you can put these forms in and they should populate in your search engine. We also run all of these off of the Code of Federal Regulations. We have the Conforming Rule of 1995, the lead-based paint regulation, the Housing Choice Voucher Guidebook, and then we have our OFA, Oklahoma Housing Finance Agency Administrative Plan. Now, we do update this plan annually, but the HQS is normally usually the same. We're going to discuss today one of those manuals that the inspectors use when they're inspecting their units for you to help out and pass these units more so often. The 13 key aspects are going to be that we have to follow from those CFR rules, are sanitary facilities, food preparation, space and security, thermal environment. Illumination and electricity, structure and materials, interior air quality, water supply, lead-based paint, access, site and neighborhood, sanitary conditions, and smoke detectors is the last 13, but they're going to be adding carbon monoxide detectors as well for that last 13. So a couple of inspection results that we have, as everyone knows, is that what everyone's goal is going to be a pass. We want the units to pass as well, but we also fail units because we have to follow the regulations. The failing of the unit is if at least one item of the unit fails and does not meet the minimum requirements. Inconclusive, we usually use that in-house. That's going to be used as paint waivers or if we have a construction waivers, but normally the landlords won't see that, but that's something that we do utilize. No-show is going to be where a tenant does not show up or is not available for that appointment. And then cancellations can be from all three parties, from an OFA staff member not being able to make it, to a tenant not being able to make it, a prior medical appointment, or even a landlord requesting for it to be canceled. So you will see those. Now, when you receive your letters from your deficiencies and comments from the agents, that cancel, well, that no-show is going to stay on that letter. That is going to be default, meaning that it's not that it was a no-show for that specific day, but if it's a no-show throughout that inspection time frame, it's going to stay on that letter. We're going to also discuss this a little bit more once I get to the bulk of this conference, but I wanted to highlight these in my slideshow, and these are mandatory room requirements. So all the requirements to inspect the unit are they have to have either a living room / sleeping room, which we would count the living room as a sleeping room if it's an efficiency unit, a kitchen, and a bathroom. These are going to be the mandatory requirements for must-have units. Also, the minimal electrical requirement, I have these stated as well for the bedroom / living room, also the sleeping rooms. So we have one working outlet and one working permanently installed ceiling light fixture, or you can have 2 working outlets. In the kitchen, You have one working outlet and one permanently installed ceiling or wall-like fixture. Again, we'll get into the bulk of it, but you can't have a mobile or a table lamp. This was not be permitted for it to take the place of any of these. In the bathroom, you only need a one working permanently installed ceiling and wall light fixture. Now remember, these are going to be the base level or the base standard for it to pass the HQS. So city codes can be a little bit higher too, but we're doing at the base level. Now we love the landlords that go above and beyond and keep the units at a more decent and nice, and that's what we want. But these are going to be base standards for housing quality standards. Other rooms used for living, dens, playrooms, dining rooms, there's no electrical requirement. If they exist, they must be checked. Now, other rooms used for livings, you know, that can also qualify on when we get into the bulk of it as a sleeping room as well. And a sleeping room is required to have those outlets in there, which is a bedroom. Window requirements, rooms that must have a window that allows for the entry of natural light. We have living room and bedrooms. If the window is designed to open, it must open. For security purposes, you can have those windows nailed shut, but it has to be another exit from the actual building in case of a fire. Now, in a bathroom, if you do not, I'll go in a little bit more, if you have no ventilation in the bathroom, and the ventilation is only used for the window, you cannot nail that shut as well. Skylights are also acceptable because they allow the natural illumination in there in that room. So this is going to be the bulk of our topic today, which is the 52580-A. This is going to be the HUD inspection checklist. So you can search this in your search engines, but make sure you put that -A at the end of that, but it's a HUD checklist, and you will pull up this form. This is the most up-to-date housing quality standard guidance that we have today. And it has 8 sections that we're going to discuss today, but this is what the agents are going out there, and this is what they're doing. Now, our administration plan or administrative plan actually can give a little bit more guidance to some of the rules, the acceptability to these rules, but this is going to be the base of it. So we have the living room, the kitchen, the bathroom, other rooms used for living and halls, secondary rooms. Secondary rooms will be like closets, building exterior, heating and plumbing, and general health and safety. Once these slideshows are available, you can click on this actual button and it takes you to the HUD website, and it pulls up and populates this onto your screen. But I'm going to pull it up myself, and this is what it looks like. Now, it's two parts to this form. One is probably about 8 pages long, and the other one is 19. The 19 pages actually gives you operational guidelines to HQS. The 8 is a little bit short and sweet to the checklist of what the agents are checking for and their deficiency comments. But this is what the form, the first page is how we get the unit information, the tenant information, what type of unit it is, from a single family to a multifamily, duplex condos. But here's the good part of it. When you scroll to part 2 or page 2, this is where it gives you those definitions, the failed, the inconclusive, the past, also 1.1, which is what we're going to start with. 1.1, since I stated that a living room must be present, that's a must-have for HQS. So that's what we're going to be checking off, is at the 1.1. And then it's going to skip to 1.2, which is electricity. And this is where I am. I'll highlight this so you can see exactly where I am at the 1.2. But the electricity part, there must be 2 of these in the room, or 1 outlet and 1 permanent light fixture. So 2 outlets or 1 outlet and 1 permanently installed ceiling or wall light fixture. Okay. And then it just goes based on this. So 1.2 to 1.3. 1.3 is talking about electrical hazards. I will highlight this. Some electrical hazards will be broken wiring, non-insulated wiring, frayed wiring, improper types, things like that. Wires laying, by standing in water and unsafe places, light fixtures that are hanging from the wires, that is going to be a hazard as well. Exposed fuel boxes. But if you read this part, once you get into it, this will help your units have a higher percentage of passing because this gives you our operational guidelines to this. And then going down to security, with the security doors and windows that are accessible from the outside, we want to make sure that those are lockable. Meaning that someone can't get into the unit from the outside. And usually accessible from the outside, if you're looking at a single family home, 6 feet from the ground is going to be what that's stated on. Or if you're in a multi-family, a high rise, if you have a fire escape, anything that is accessible from the outside must be lockable for security purposes. Okay. Security, just to talk, since we talked about doors, it doesn't say this, but I do want to acknowledge this. Well, since we're talking about doors, in our OFA administrative plan, it does state interior doors, because I want to guide this, because these are 2 guidelines that we want to follow. Interior doors, we must not have any holes in them. That is going to be in our administrative plan, and they have to be intact, and they can't use a key to be able to go in and out of that door. And that's going to be the interior doors, bedrooms, and things like that. Moving on to 1.5, window conditions. Windows no longer have the capacity to keep out wind, rain, and the outside elements as vermin, things like that. Missing, broken panes, cracked panes that can cause a cutting hazard. Severe crack panes that can cause wind to come in. Those are going to be the window check-ins that we're going to be checking as well, as long as with the seal, to make sure the window is fully functionable, that it opens, it closes, it locks if it's accessible from the outside. Moving on to 1.6, ceiling conditions. We want to make sure that the ceilings are sound and free from any hazard effects. And that's all that it is about HQS, is we want to make sure that everything is not a hazard condition to the tenant as they're living in the units. And that's the bulk of HQS. We want to make sure that the ceiling, there's no holes in it that was allowing drafts and vermin, anything that enter in outside the unit. I've done some inspections where a complete ceiling was missing. It rained inside the unit, and it happens. But that's something that's going to definitely fail in inspection. Moving on to 1.7, wall conditions. Again, we want to make sure that the wall is sound and free from hazard defects. This is to ensure that the tenant is not exposed to any structural hazards, weak, buckling, leaning walls, and ensure that the rooms are reasonable weather type. Damaged wall, water leaks, things like that. We want to make sure that we don't do that. Moving on to the floor conditions, which is 1.8. This is to ensure that the tenant is not exposed to any threat of structural collapse, weak floors, and to also ensure that there's no tripping hazards. We don't want the tenant to be able to walk in a huge gap, uneven floors, and they trip, including landlords walking in. We want to make sure that it is a sound. Another key point that's in our administrative plan is going to be that all floors must be in a finished state. There's no plywood, raw wood, or unsealed concrete. It's not permitted. All wood floors must be sanded to a smooth surface and sealed. Any loose or warped boards must be resecured and made level. If it's not able to be leveled, then it must be replaced. And that is on our administrative plan. Okay. And then we'll talk to 1.9, which is the lead-based paint. That's dealing with any chipping, caulking, peeling, paint that's going to be deteriorating from the inside. If you look at this section here, 2 square feet or 10% of a total surface area, like a window sill, things like that. We want to make sure if it's over that and it's above the de minimis level, we're going to have a clearance testing. And all of that is explained here too as well in this paragraph here. And like I said, this is an operational guidance that we use as inspectors when we're out in the field. Moving on, this is going to be what the checklist is with the agent or the inspector that is out there. They are marked as pass or they are marked as fail. We can also mark something. We're going to pass, the living room is there. Let's say with the electricity, we can pass it, and that's what it is. We just go through this whole form and mark things that's going on. Window condition. You know, we can fail that and write a statement in that is, you know, what's going on with that window, because it's severe, it's not weather tight, things like that. The same with the ceiling. We can pass it and we can make a comment even if we pass it. A pass with comment is going to be where a thing is, it passes, but it doesn't require a fail rating, but we're still going to notate that to let it know what's going on. If it's a stained ceiling, it used to be a water leak, but there's no access to water leak that's going on, we can pass that with a comment. Deteriorating wall, we're going to check and make sure that there's not a water leak, and if it is, we will go ahead and fail it and state that. Moving on to the kitchen. Now, on the kitchen, on the checklist, we'll pass if it's present. But if you read this section here, from 2.2 to 2.9, deals with the electricity, illumination, the window, the ceiling, the wall. Most of the rooms that we inspect, they're going to have the same thing: the ceilings, the walls, the electricity. Some rooms might not even have the electricity if it's required, like a closet. But if it is an outlet in there, we have to test it. Anything that's going to be available in that unit or in that room, we still have to inspect that portion of it. But if you look, we do have some modifications to certain rooms. Like on 2.2 electricity, we talked about that in the beginning of the presentation. What it is at least one outlet and one permanently light fixture. So in the living room / sleeping room, it was the option of one permanently installed wall or light fixture and an outlet, or 2 working outlets. But in the kitchen, it has to be these. In the 2.5 window condition, the absence is not required in the kitchen, but if it's there, we have to check it and make sure that it's operational. Moving on to the bulk of the kitchen, which is the stove, the range, and the oven. Both oven and stove, they must be workable in the unit. Everything must be workable in the unit when it comes to the stove. All burners. So if you have 4 burners and one does not work, that's going to require a fail rating. And if it's gas, it's going to most likely require a life-threatening rating. So you have to fix that within 24 hours. But if it's electric, it can also be a light fixture if it's something to deal with shock or that can cause fire through the electricity part. Moving on to the refrigerator. Refrigerator must be present during the inspection. Must be present. This needs to maintain a temperature low enough for the food not to spoil over a reasonable time frame. The sink must be operable, must be connected to a public system, private system that actually works with hot and cold water. It must have a proper gas trap. We use P traps, S traps, but it has to have that. Running hot water is a big key factor. In our administrative plan, all sinks must have a functional stopper. That's something that's outside of this 52580, but it's in our administrative plan that we have to follow. All sinks must have an operational stopper. That includes the bathroom sinks as well. Moving on to space and storage and preparations to serve the food. Must have a space available for storage, for the preparation and serving the food. Now, a table or a portable cabinet can suffice for this as well. And again, moving to the checklist part of it, we'll check yes if the unit is present and mark any hazards or any less than perfect conditions where we can pass it with that rating. Moving on to the third required, or the third must have rooms or facilities in a unit is the bathroom. This is to assure that there is at least one bathroom present in the unit for exclusive use of the occupant, and there is a working toilet, sink, tub, or shower. These facilities can be scattered throughout the unit, but most that we usually inspect, they're going to be in the same area. And again, 3.2 to 3.9, we have the same thing going on there with the floors, the ceilings, the windows. It's going to be the same thing with some modifications. In the bathroom, the minimum requirement for the bathroom is at least one permanent light fixture. Now, a lot of us have a lot of outlets in our bathroom, and we can have outlets, that's fine. But that can also pose a potential threat or potential hazard if the outlet is close to standing water or where water is going to be sitting or can splash on. That can be considered a hazard. So those GFCIs are pretty good for that as well. On the window condition, like I stated early, window condition, it's not required in the bathroom to have a window. But if you do not have a window in the bathroom, you must have a vent system, a functional vent system in your bathroom. If you do not have a vent system, then yes, we can have a window in there, and that window must be open and closed. You can't nail this one shut if you're using it for that vent process. Wall conditions. Floor condition, that's that 3.8 through 3.2 to 3.9. Similar conditions from the living room to the bathroom. Moving to the bulk of the bathroom is going to be the toilet. The toilet. We want to make sure that this is located in an enclosed room. It has to be inside the unit in exclusive use for the participant or the occupant. We want to make sure that it's functional and connected to the right sewer system, public or private, but it has to be in working order. With the toilet, we want this to be a privacy section for the tenant or the occupant in the unit. In our administrative plan, we have it down where a worn or cracked toilet seats can produce a fail. Inoperable or oversized tank lids can also be a fail according to our administrative plan. So we want those toilet tank lids to fit properly on the tank. Moving to the sink, which is 3.11. we want this must be permanently installed inside. Now, we can't use the kitchen sink as the bathroom sink. It has to have exclusive for this particular time frame. So you have to have two separate for the kitchen, and you can't use the bathroom for the kitchen. But again, it can be scattered within the unit, but it has to have a separate sink for that. Has to be installed with hot and cold water, proper drain and connectors to the gas trap as well. Tub must be private as well, 3.2 or 3.12. Ventilation, remember we talked about the window condition, but this has to be a working vent system. And it tells you what we electric fans, vent shafts. And again, next to the next page is going to start with the checklist. If the bathroom is present, any electricity hazards, we can fail it, things like that, security. We can put that in there as well. We try to give you the locations, even outlet. If we do an outlet, we look at it as I've seen some where it says ground broken, but we'll try to give you the location as well. If it's multiple on the left wall, we'll put left wall. But we'll try to give you the locations of where these deficiencies are to help you utilize that as well. Moving to 4, other rooms used for livings. These are areas in the unit that are walked through and lived on a regular basis. This includes like finished basements, playrooms. It doesn't really include the utility room, attached shed, or closed porch if they're closed off from the main living area. And then again, from 4.2 to 4.9, this is going to be the similar of the wall, the floors, and the ceilings. Okay, but other rooms used for living can also be a bedroom. And if you look here, that will put a room code as a 1. But that will still have to meet the standards for a bedroom. So discussing a little bit of the bedrooms, we have those, again, what the living room was, we have those 2 outlets, or we have 1 permanently installed light fixture on the wall or the ceiling. We must have a window in the bedroom that can be a skylight if it's openable, or if it's made to open, it has to open. And those are going to be those. I will say this, a closet is not required in a bedroom. Now, we would love to have closets in the bedroom, but that is not a failed rating. That is a missing closet for us to put it down as a bedroom. I want to get that clear today. That is not a failed option. So moving to, again, the 4.2 to the 4.9 is going to be the similar ones. Now, 4.6 is added in here, and to be honest, on this form, it should most likely be 4.10 because 4.6 is already taken. But 4.10, we have the smoke detectors and even the carbon monoxide detectors. We want to make sure that we follow the National Fire Protection Association. And we have that where it's 1 operable or battery operated hardwired smoke detector must be present and working on each level of the unit. That includes the basement, but we don't want to put it in crawl spaces or unfinished attics that way. But as well as the carbon monoxide detector. So it doesn't have it on this rating. This is going to be fairly new with the carbon monoxide detectors. But we want a carbon monoxide detector. If it's a gas unit, we want it to be installed in the hallways or in the immediate vicinity of each sleeping room. Let's put it there. So carbon monoxide should be installed in the immediate vicinity of each sleeping room. So if you have all the bedrooms on one side of the house, yes, you can put one right there in the hallway if it's in that immediate vicinity. If you have a attached garage in your unit, and the garage enters into the kitchen, but the bedrooms are on the other side, we want to put a carbon monoxide right above that entry level coming in from the garage. So sometimes you might have to have 2 working carbon monoxide detectors in your house. But we want to make sure that we get those installed. Without that, that can be a hazard to the family as well, especially when we come to gas-fueled appliances and the car parking in the garage. So this can be different of how we rate it. Over here, we have the room codes, what we can do, dining rooms, bedrooms, and that's what we coded at. So any additional room that is not required in the unit is going to most likely go here when it goes to like an additional bathroom or an additional bedroom. We're going to notify it here on the room code. So if you have a 3-bedroom, you're going to have two number 4s filled out for your bedrooms or sleeping rooms. And the form comes with multiple number 4. So like I stated, make sure when you do your search engine, you put that 52580-A, put that in there and it will pull up the 19 pages. If you don't, it will only pull up the one with the 8, which it will be all of these. And that's just what the inspector does. But it doesn't give you the operational guidance if you don't put that -A in there. So moving to 5. Secondary rooms. These are going to be rooms that are not used for living, like pantries, some laundry rooms, closets, unfinished basements. And also a good thing about these do not require heat as a secondary room. But we're going to look at this as 5.2 to 5.4. They're going to be the same. We're going to be checking the windows if it's going in there, the ceilings, the floors, everything. If it's going to be there, we have to inspect it. So we have next, it skips down to the building exterior. And we're going to go through these a little bit one by one because they kind of break up differently from the internal side of the unit. Okay, so the conditions of the foundation. Again, we're looking for hazardous conditions, unsound. We're just trying to make sure that the tenant is not going to be subject to these conditions. Severe structural defects, huge cracks in the foundation of bricks to allow vermin, to allow wind, to allow weather inside the unit that can cause collapse. We're going to be looking at those. 6.2, these are going to be stairs, rails, and porches. That's what we're going to have to check. Some fail ratings will be broken, rotting, or missing steps, even if they're concrete. They can cause a tripping hazard. That's what we're going to be looking for. Another fail, absent of a handrail, where there are 4 or more consecutive steps. This is required whether attached to the building or detached to the building. I have a lot of questions about that that comes up. Well, this is not going to their units. Well, if the tenant is, if it's a common access to that area, it requires to have those handrails if it's 4 or more steps, consecutive steps. Also, absence or not secure railing that's around a porch or a balcony. Now, if it's raised up between 30 inches or above, that's when it's required. If it's about 12, even if it's 25 to 26 inches, it's not required, but 30 inches and above, that's where it's going to be required. Now, moving on to the conditions of the roof and the gutters. Building envelope is not weather tight. We're looking at the fascia board, the soffit, things like that. We're going to make sure that those is weather type and not allowing any wind or vermin to get into the units. One thing about gutters are not required for HQS, but if they're there, we have to check it. So if you remove it, that's fine. But if they're severe loose or if they're hanging, we're going to fail that for gutters, but they're not required. Moving on, let's go to 6.4, condition of exterior surfaces. This is severe buckling and bowing, large cracks in the holes. We have the chimney as well. Want to make sure that it's not showing any evidence of weakness where it's collapsing, bricks falling off, motors falling off. We want to make sure that. And then we'll talk about the 6.6 lead-based paint for exterior surfaces. Again, this is all in here for us to check out above the de minimis level, which is 20 square feet area on the surface level. Now with the lead-based paint, this is units that are built prior to 1978 that has a child under the age of 6 that's going to meet this criteria here for defective paint. Moving on to mobile homes and tie downs. Mobile or manufactured homes, they must be properly stable and also have a proper approved tie downs as well. Moving to heat and plumbing. We're going to check the accuracy of the heating equipment. In our administrative plan, we have it that the must be capable of maintaining an interior temperature of 65 degrees between the month of October through May 1st. So it has to be able to maintain that 65 degrees. Now this can be direct or indirect. Direct means it has a heating source inside of that room. Indirect, it can come from the outside, furnaces, things on the outside. They might have a heating in the hallway that goes. It just has to be able to maintain those rooms at that temperature. Safety, this is going to be improper vent pipes, damage, potential fires that can pose a threat to or hazard condition to the clients as well. Ventilation through cooling, air conditioning is not required. So we can check if it's no AC, central AC, we're going to check the windows to make sure that the windows open and close so they can provide ventilation and cooling for the tenant. Water heaters. We're going to make sure that it has a pressure relief valve, discharge line, no electricity hanging out. We're going to make sure that that happens as well. Water supply that is connected to a city or town water system. We're going to check that with the plumbing as well. Has to have a main water drain that feeds to the pipes. Sewer conditions, where we have overflow from clean out lines. That's also going to be a fail rating as well. Number 8, we have general health and safety. We have the access to the unit. This provides direct access to the unit provided. This must be the main entry. The tenants cannot enter someone else's dwelling to go to theirs. They have to have a private one. Same as an exit. Have to have an alternate means to exit that meets local and state regulations. Evidence of infestation. Severe infestation, mice, vermin, roaches. It has to be a severe for it to qualify as a fail rating. Garbage and debris. Any garbage or debris that can take a person more than 1 hour to pick up will require a fail rating as well. You have the interior stairs and common halls. 8.7 other interior hazards that we haven't covered in this checklist. Elevators, interior air quality, which can go with the mold-like substance in bathrooms because they're not properly using the vent system or their window system for it to get ventilation. Moving to 8.11, this is if we have to have a certification for the lead-based paint. This is where this would be as well. Okay. All right. So uh-oh. Well, since it stopped there, we're going to end my presentation there, but it will be available to everyone after this. I wanted to discuss a little bit of the 10 repair items that we see, which would be weather stripping around windows and doors, stove and range, inoperable stove burners or knobs that are missing. Security, missing striker plate is a big one. Damaged doors, electrical hazards, no cover plates or light fixture cover or light switch cover plates, broken grounds or exposed wiring, water heater missing the discharge line or proper draft hood and vent connectors, missing and damaged handrails when they're required with 4 or more consecutive steps. Defective paint is going to be a huge one when we're dealing with a family with the age of under 6. And here's a couple of pictures of those of caulking with the brick, plaster. Those are going to be, and chipping and peeling is going to be that second picture. And the biggest one is going to be missing batteries and carbon monoxide and smoke detectors. That's a big fail, just malfunctioning. Mold-like substance in the bathrooms because they're not utilizing the vents. And then tripping hazards, number 1. That's anything that's across the floor, frayed carpet, cables running across the floor, or uneven wood. But I want to thank everybody for the time that you have given me out of your busy schedules. And I want to pass along to Miss Mary Hoock and Mr. Ken Erb.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good.
Yes,
Well, welcome. My name's Ken Erb. I'm going to be talking about the housing assistance payment contract and lease requirements. The discussions earlier will play into this as well. So let me go to the next. So the program requirements, we are governed by the Code of Federal Regulations 982.305, which says before the Public Housing Agency may not approve tenancy or execute a HAP contract until the following are met. The unit has to be eligible. The lease, including the tenancy addendum, has to be provided at contract execution. The rent has to be reasonable. The rent has to be affordable, meaning the family cannot pay over 40%, and the unit must be inspected and met housing quality standards. So with COVID and some other things, the Public and Indian Housing Notice 2017-20 gives the PHA an option to execute a HAP contract with no life-threatening deficiencies. OHFA is using this for new admissions to the programs and anybody that is coming to our agency through the use of portability. So the request for tenancy approval. The family submits the scheduling appointment request form that Mr. Love talked about earlier. And the reason that we use that scheduling appointment request form is we have to make sure that the unit amenities are included so we can do rent reasonable, because one of the requirements is the rent has to be reasonable. So we take into account all the amenities that the unit has and we determine whether it's rent reasonable or not. The lease is reviewed by the agent and submitted at contract execution, and the request for tenancy approval is also completed at contract execution. Sometimes it's good to go back to why you're doing all these steps. Code of Federal Regulations 982.308 says the initial lease term must be for at least 1 year. If a owner and tenant agree, it can be a 2-year lease, but it has to be at least a minimum of 1 year. I know that we frequently ask landlords to include additional information or write additional information on their lease, and the requirement is the lease must contain all of the following information. It must contain the names of the owner and the tenant. It has to have the unit rented, the address, the apartment number, and any other information needed to identify the contracted unit. It has to have the term of the lease, the initial term, and any provisions for renewal. The amount of the monthly rent to owner, and one that it says that it has to have a specification of what utilities and appliances are to be supplied by the owner and what utilities and appliances are to be supplied by the family. I know that if a unit is generally tenants responsible for all rent, and then the agent will say, well, you have to write down who's responsible for which. And the reason is the Code of Federal Regulations says that these are all the items that must be included on the lease. So the housing assistance payment contract is covered by Code of Federal Regulations 982.162A2. Now that housing assistance payment contract is between the owner and the PHA. The lease that we talked about is between the owner and the tenant. OHFA is not a party to the lease. The term of the HAP contract begins on the first day of the term of the lease and ends on the last day of the term of the lease. The HAP contract must be executed no later than 60 calendar days from the beginning of the lease term. The reason for that is when we come out and do the inspection and we execute the HAP contract when the unit passes, we're doing it on the same day that the lease should start. If for some reason the owner is not there, but they provided a lease, we can execute the contract and send the paperwork to the owner, but we have to have it executed within 60 calendar days. If it's not executed after the 60-day period, the PHA may not make any payments to the owner. And all of these are covered by different Code of Federal Regulations that are listed. So when we get this scheduling appointment request form that Mr. Love talked about earlier, we review it for completeness. You know, we have to remember that before we can do a HAP contract, we have to make sure the unit is rent reasonable. So we have to check owner eligibility. One thing that is sometimes confusing is the owner's address on the unit on the scheduling appointment request form and the unit address cannot be the same. And the owner information that's provided on the scheduling appointment request form must be who's going to be receiving the housing assistance payments. We verify the bedrooms, the voucher size is correct. We verify that the address, we do check the address with USPS to make sure that it's recognized by the US Postal Service. We check the structure type, whether it's single family, multifamily. We look at the utilities and appliances and who is responsible, and we update any utility allowance. So we gather all that information that's on that form strictly to make sure that we know which unit is identified and that the rent is reasonable. If the rent is reasonable, we have to take it a step further and make sure that it's affordable to the tenant. At this point, the tenant's portion cannot exceed 40% of their monthly adjusted income. This is really protection for the owner and the tenant because we don't want a tenant to lease a unit that they can't afford after the first month. And any incomplete information, we'll make a attempt to contact the owner or the tenant for the missing information. But if we're unsuccessful, then we will send out letters, which is going to delay the scheduling process. So we go out and we get this information, we schedule the inspection, and all of the housing quality standards that Quinton talked about, we're going to review at the inspection, and as long as it passes, then we're going to process this lease and contract. The owner will actually sign the contract and the tenant will supply the information. When we get the information in to process the lease, we want to make sure that the right owner is getting paid. So we verify that with the tax ID that matches the W-9 that's supplied with the contract. Again, we also make sure that it's not over 40% for the tenant if they're moving to the unit. When we execute the lease and contract, there's a summary of payments page that is printed out and given to the owner and the tenant. When we're processing it, we have to make sure that the housing assistance payment, the tenant rent, or the utility reimbursement matches that summary of payments. If something changed or during the process from the time it was scheduled until it was processed, we may be sending out lease correction letters. And if we do send out any lease correction letters that were found with the processing, we will say such things as make sure that the tenant, the lease shows that the tenant is responsible for the water. This letter now becomes part of the HAP contract, so keep them together. Sometime during the tenant's tenancy, you may want to change responsibility for the refrigerator, or like Mr. Love talked about, and you may want to now make the tenant responsible for different utilities. If that is the case, any leases governing the tenant or owner responsibility for utilities or appliances, we need a new housing assistance payment contract. So when Mr. Love on the rent increase form says you're proposing a rent increase, but you also have a change in responsibility for utilities or appliances to stop the rent increase, but we can consider that rent increase when you supply the tenant supplies the new scheduling appointment request form. If there are any changes in lease provisions governing the term of the lease, let's say that you want to, after the first year, you like the tenant and you want to make the next one a 2-year lease. Well, that's governing the terms of the lease. So we would need a new HAP contract. And if the family moves to a new unit, even in the same complex, oftentimes units get damaged and you move the tenant to a different unit, but we really need to terminate the contract on the unit that they vacated and execute a new one on the new unit so we can continue payments. Because the HAP contract says the housing authority cannot pay for any unit after the month the tenant moved out. Also, during the time that the tenant is living in your unit, you may decide that you want to sell your unit, or you may be on the receiving end and want to buy some units. Section 14 of the the Housing Assistance Payment Contract says that the owner may not assign the HAP contract to a new owner without prior written consent of OHFA. You have to notify us, because if we're unaware that you sell your property, we're going to continue to make payments. So when you get to the process of thinking about selling it, we need to be aware of it so we can stop payments to you and make payments to the new owner. The new owner must agree and to be bound and comply with the HAP contract that's in effect. They can't raise the rent if it's during the initial term. If they can't raise the rent unless they submit a rent increase, They can't change responsibilities for any of the utilities or appliances because that would all require a new housing assistance payment contract. So they have to agree to the contract that's in effect. If the owner sells, so you as an owner, if you sell the property, notify OHFA and who's going to be the new owner, and OHFA will send a packet of information to the new owner. The whole purpose of renting units is you want to be paid, and we want to take this ownership change and process it so we can get the correct owner paid. The new owner will need to provide a copy of the warranty deed, closing statement or property tax record, copies of a management agreement if there are any, the completed W-9 signed and dated, because remember, that's what the finance team uses to verify that the tax identification number complies with the Internal Revenue Service. The Internal Revenue Service's SS4 form, which is for the tax ID number, and a completed ownership relationship to occupancy form, because if you are related in some aspects to the tenant, it may or may not require a reasonable accommodation from the family, and a direct deposit form so the payments can go out through direct deposit. I know that's been a lot of information. If there's any questions, you can use the Q&A and go from there. And I'm going to turn it over to Mary Hoock to see if she has any additional things to add. Thank you for your time. Hopefully you learned something, and it's always nice to go back and refresh yourself of why you're actually following all the steps that you're asked to do. And it's all governed by the regulations and the Code of Federal Regulations or our administrative plan. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. We are so glad to have you here today. Holly has posted a lot of information directing you to our website. You can see a copy of the contract that Ken just went over. Also has a copy of the tenancy addendum. She's also put information out there about the inspection checklist that Quinton went over. We're running a little ahead of schedule, and so we're supposed to take break at 10:30, but I guess we can go ahead and take break now unless Holly wants me to answer some of these questions live at this point. What do you think?
I think there are a few questions that we can open it up that I know our staff has been really good about answering the questions as we've been going along, but let me go ahead and ask this one. How is Section 8 addressing current market rates? The current payment levels for Section 8 has not kept up with the prevailing market.
So HUD posted some new amounts first part of this year. And as a result of that, we increased our payment standards up to 110% of the FMRs effective June 1st. And that seemed to ease a little bit of the crisis. Currently, as of 10/1, HUD also posted new FMRs, and Tim is in the process of looking at those to see if we want to increase more on the payment standards. HUD posts the FMRs, which is what HUD says is the average use in an area based on a 2-bedroom. What we do as a housing agency is we have to post what's called payment standards, which can be up to 110% of those FMRs. What you have to understand, though, is HUD doesn't give us any more money. We have a pot of money that we can help the families that they've indicated. And so when we pay more rent increases, when we pay more out on initial units, then that's all the money that we have. And once we exhaust that money, then we cannot lease any more people into the program. And so if our pot of money only helps 100 now instead of 150, then we've reduced our program size and we can only help 100 families. One of the other misconceptions to the market is that when an owner increases the rent on a property, the tenant may not be able to afford that, and the payment standard is the most that HUD is going to pay on their behalf. So if you increase it $150 each month, the tenant may end up having to move because OHFA is not going to absorb that cost. The tenant is going to have to try and absorb that cost. And if they're on a fixed income, they're not going to be able to absorb that cost. There was another question. It says, I have a tenant that received a change in payment from HUD mid-year. HUD mailed a change letter late and it was received on the 4th. It indicates that HUD will now pay 100% of the rent effective on the 1st of the month before the letter was mailed. However, HUD only made a partial payment. So without knowing who the tenant is, each month around the 28th, 29th of the month, we cut checks. We do not print all checks on the 1st of the month. We do try to mail them on the first working day of the month, but checks are generated days in advance of the first day of the month because there's a lot goes into that check run. When a family has a change, we're still making the payment that we would have normally made prior to that change. So if this family that you're referring to, if we were paying $500 a month, you should have received the $500 a month payment on the 1st of the month. And then the extra that we paid for on the next month would have been the change that was made. So if that family lost a job or lost a person out of their household where we would pay more, then we will pay that additional to bring them up to the new amount. If OHFA delays payment past the 60 days that is listed in the HAP contract, the owner can request the late payment from OHFA, but you have to send a copy of the lease showing what the late payment is. You have to request it in writing, and you have to send it to OHFA management staff to get that. You can send it through the rental HAP email or the Research HCV email to get those reviewed.
Hey, Mary, there is another question about what happens if prior to moving in an inspection, an application has been made. The landlord does some upgrades after the previous tenant moves out, such as adding ceiling fans, upgrading the stove, etc. And it's not noted in the initial application. Does the landlord need to submit a new application, and will this change the possible rental rate?
So if I'm understanding the question, the owner and tenant sends in the request for inspection. And that information that you listed on that form is what we're going to utilize to list what amenities you said were in there, who's paying what utilities, and what all's furnished. And so that's what we're basing the rent comparables on to give you the rent that you requested. If we've asked you to lower the rent because of the tenant's affordability, that has nothing to do with the comparability. So we have to make sure we don't get those confused. If we have already submitted it for scheduling and we've set the rent amount, if you want to change that at that point, then you need to negotiate that with the field agent that comes out to do the inspection, or you can call our office and ask us to relook at it. But what we try to do is go off of the scheduling request appointment form and give you the rent that you originally asked for. If for some reason we asked you to lower it and it's because of comparables, then if you do fix something in the unit or have some additional amenities, then we can rerun that, but we would have to have something in writing that says I've updated the unit, I've put ceiling fans in, I've put other amenities into the unit that would count, like washer dryer hookups, paying some of the utilities, furnishing, pest control, different things like that will increase the comparable.
Another question that we have, once the 52580A inspection is done by a field agent, do the landlords get a copy?
I'm gonna
la-
let Quinton answer that.
The landlords do not receive a copy of the 52580. We actually updated to a digital format. So the letter that is sent out to the landlord with the comments of the deficiency, that's what's stated with the requirement from the owner, or if it's required for the tenant responsibility, or if it's life-threatening, that's going to be all stated on that letter that we mail out the next business day from the inspection. Also, another question that I have from a Ms. Green says, why am I responsible to make repairs that were passed in the unit for the tenant to occupy at first, but now the unit does not pass due to the tenant use and the unit failed and I have to do repairs? It's frustrating, and why this program is difficult to continue. So I would answer that by saying any damage that is done by the tenant is going to be tenant responsibility. Anything outside of normal wear and tear would go on the tenant responsibility. So if we come out and we inspect the unit and the window is cracked, but the initial inspection it passed, most likely that's going to go on a tenant responsibility. But we can't say that the tenant has to fix it with their money. We're just saying that they're a responsible party of that deficiency. So you as a landlord can discuss that with the tenant if they have to pay for it by you, or if you get it fixed by a contractor or someone that's going to fix it correctly. That also goes with like holes in the walls, anything like that. That's going to be most likely put on tenant responsibility. I just did one where oven, landlord provides the oven, but the oven door was broken. That was a tenant repair or a tenant responsibility. So if you have any concerns with your particular units that you feel that the responsibility should be the tenant, I would suggest that you contact myself, Quinton, Germany, or Mr. Kenneth Love, and we can review those inspections for you.
Once you subtract out the utilities cost and apply the 40% rule, the payments are well below market rents. Combined with inconsistent inspectors or delays in inspections equals increased vacancy, then landlords stop wanting to list their properties available to HUD. Does anyone want to address that one?
Okay, so I want to make sure I understand. Fair market rents are what HUD publishes that a housing agency can go by. So if the market will handle you on the open market, you can rent something higher, then we just can't compete with that. We can't go more than 110% over the fair market rents. And then that is based on if we have the funding to do that. What you have to understand is we use a utility chart that is average consumption, not actual consumption. And the 40% is based on the contract rent and any tenant paid utilities. And that is what the 40% is based on, because the tenant has to keep those utilities on for the unit to stay in housing quality standards and remain on the program. So hopefully I answered some of that. We do apologize that sometimes it's not easy for landlords to list on the program. It's a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of responsibility. I would ask that you reach out to Quinton, Ken Love, Emmy, Charlene, or me. Anytime you have questions, we'll try to make it as easy on you as possible, and we'll work to take care of any problems that you might have.
I want to piggyback off of Miss Mary as well. With the inspection delays, I will say this: if we can have the units, if they're ready for those initial inspections, we need them to be ready to pass the inspection, not ready to receive a list of repairs, that actually hurts us and delays us of getting back out there sooner, because that open slot could have been filled with someone that actually has that unit ready. We're trying to implement, to help out some delays, but that's going to be the big factor of it. If the unit is not ready, please do not submit it, or if you do submit it, put on a date when it will actually be ready. That way we can come out there, because all the inspectors, we're not geared to fail the unit. We're geared for these families, and we want to get these units passed. But if it's not ready and we come out there for an inspection, that's a time slot that could have went to someone for that as well. If you have any questions about inspections, about where you don't have to have a fail list, feel free to give me a call. Feel free to reach out to me and we can discuss anything to assist you. But that 52580-8, that's also going to help you get those units ready for repairs. We're implementing, I try to field cancellations. We have a good team, a scheduling team, including with management team, and we try to fill these cancellations that happen with slots that units are available. And we have agents put that in there. We have a lot of agents that put it back on their schedule themselves when they don't have to. So we're trying to fill those voids with those delays, but we also need the assistance of landlords to not schedule units that are not ready for us.
I do notice that we have someone with their hand raised in the participant list. If you will post your question within the chat, that's just, we have more than 130 people on the call right now. So if you will just post your question in the question and answer.
And Holly, I'm going to go back to this question that was asked at 8:55. It says, I'm new to this. Where is the contract number? And is the awardee the renter? She has had assistance for 2 years. You're going to find the file ID number on any letter that we've sent. If the person is a new person coming onto the program, you're going to have to use their name or the last 4 digits of their social to correspond with the agency, because they don't have a number yet. Once a contract is executed and they're admitted to the program, they are given a number, and then that number will start showing up on the letters that we send out. And then Miss Green wanted us to answer questions and not take a break because her time is valuable. I want to assure you that during the break, Holly has a video to share with you that has a lot of pertinent information that's going to be valuable to you as well. And then we have, I prefer faxing rent increases. We can't stop you from faxing them. We would ask that you mail them because it gets into the files better. If you're going to fax them, they need to be faxed 1 at a time. You cannot fax them 10 at a time, because all 10 of those will get into one tenant's file, and then you'll be upset with us for only granting 1 rent increase. So you need to fax them 1 at a time, or you can put them in through your portal. But if you put them in through your portal, they need to be 1 at a time, and you need to tie it to the tenant of that unit. Okay, because it's going to come in under you and under your EIN number, but you want to refer it to the tenant's file that's living in that unit. Miss Mills is asking how many tenants are currently holding voucher to search. Are you finding a shortage? Over the past 4 to 6 months, the market has changed so rapidly and so oddly that we're trying to keep up with it. As I said, we increased our payment standards up to 110% June 1st. We have seen a better success rate for our families since doing that. Currently, I believe we have about 800 vouchers on the street. You have to keep in mind, we are a statewide PHA, so we have from all across the state people looking in rural areas as well as in the cities. It says, can we dispute the responsible party if we feel that it was misassigned? Anytime that you have any questions about any inspection, you can contact Ken Love or Quinton, Germany, to discuss the information. Sometimes they may have to go back out and relook at it or look at the pictures that the agent took, but you can always ask for a review.
Also, Mary, I would just like to add too, that the criteria that the inspectors use when they determine responsibility is, if the item is damaged, missing, or broken, 9 out of 10 times they're going to put it on a tenant, they would cite it as a tenant responsibility. But if they identify it as normal wear and tear, then it'll be landlord responsibility. But like Mary said, if there's a question about that, then please don't hesitate to contact Quinton or myself. Thank you.
Okay, Holly, I answered that first one that's showing where it says I prefer faxing rent increases. If OHFA requests that our rents to lowered, do we have to comply? At that point, does the tenant move? So typically OHFA is not going to ask you to lower the rent if the tenant's already been living there and we've had a contract. And so I'm not understanding the question too much. If you have a new person to our assistance program and they've been living there for a couple of years and they want to use the assistant and remain living there, if you want to keep them as a tenant and them have assistance, then you're going to have to comply. If you don't want to comply, it's your choice. You don't have to, but that tenant will have to find a different unit because we won't be able to rent that unit for that tenant under the assistance. And it says, how can we address tenant yards? We have gotten several liens. Okay, you have to enforce your lease. So depending on what's in your lease, those are the steps you're going to take. My recommendation would be to first communicate with the tenant to find out if there's some kind of health issue or something going on and they may just need a little bit of help. Or, is it a monthly problem? If they're not adhering to your lease, then you're going to have to enforce that lease against them. Please keep in mind that this program is an income-based program. People are eligible to participate in it because of income. It doesn't make them a good tenant, but it does not make them a bad tenant. Landlords have to screen the tenants just like you would if you were screening for an unassisted unit. And then you have to, make that tenant communicate with you based on your lease, and they have to adhere to the lease. Says if you fail an initial inspection and the tenant needs to move in before the next inspection, can the lease and contract be dated to when the tenant moved in? I'm gonna let Quinton answer that one.
So that is going to be straightforward and no at this time because we can't go backwards. Now we do have a HAPCheck NLT that we have that we can do a contract, but that's only on new admissions to the programs. So some of you guys can have multiple tenants. They might have tenants, but you can ask the agent if they're new admissions to the program, they qualify for this new NLT that we're doing. And what it is the unit has to have at least no more than 8 repairs, and we can do a contract, but it has to be new unit and it cannot be any life-threatening items. So if a tenant is moving into your unit, but the agent will discuss that and they should offer that to you during the inspection. But if you have a tenant that needs to move in after an inspection, if it's a minor list and it's not something that's going to take you a while to get it taken care of, please give me a call, reach out to us. Like I stated, we have cancellation spots that come open because daily living. Now, again, this meeting is with over 100 people, and we don't have that many cancellations to fill in, but if it's something happened, we will work our tails off to get you filled in and to get it taken care of. So please reach out to me, myself, Quinton Germany, or Mr. Love, Kenneth Love, and we will assist you as much as possible. But as of right now, that answer is going to be no, unless it's a new admission and qualifies for a HAPMA NLT, 8 efficiencies or less, and no life-threatening issues. We can do a contract on that failed rating.
I wanted to, there's a follow-up question to the question about lawn care. It says she cannot afford to get her yard cut every 2 weeks. We have communicated with the tenant and Section 8 pays all of her rent. Does anyone have any guidance?
I
Can you
don't.
repeat the question, Holly?
If it's the tenant's responsibility to
Right.
make sure that the lawn is mowed. If she can't afford to do that, if she does not have a lawnmower of her own, then she's gonna have to reach out to some community action agencies to see if they can help, or if they've got a neighbor that would do it for her, or if the landlord would, want to do that. We don't have any type of programs that will help with mowing the yard. Emmy, do you know of any community action agencies that do any kind of service like that?
No, ma'am, you could probably reach out to various churches that may have a service like that. The only other thing I could suggest would be to possibly include that as amenity in the lease, and you would just put that as part of the lease. Would
For
you
the
agree that
landlord
that
to
would be-
take care of it.
for the landlord to take care of it? Yeah, that would be included as part of your overall contract rent. That would be a service that you would provide for that client.
Yeah, and you could increase your rent, what that
Mhm.
cost is gonna be to you, maybe $5 to $10 each month to do that for the 3 months that the lawn needs to be mowed. You also probably have some other shrubs and different things that you have to take care of.
Good answer, ladies.
Okay, so this one says that you've had a tenant that's been in the unit for 25 years and now you've been asked to replace the windows. I would like to know who that tenant is so that Quinton and I can look at the file. If she's been there for 25 years and there's been not a significant amount of upkeep to the property, you may be able to reach out to some agencies for some help in getting the unit up to par. 25 years is a long time for the windows not to have been addressed. As homeowners, we know that we have to do upkeep on our property. Rental property is no different.
I just want to interject that if you do have a particular client issue, I know this is common knowledge, but don't address by name in the chat. Just send that directly. And what is the contact information if they need to do that, Mary?
They can send all through email to researchhcv@ohfa.org. Tim showed them that information on our website earlier, and I think you could put that in the chat. If you will send that into that email address, we look those up. You can be tenant specific, but no private information, no social security numbers or EIN numbers. But you can give us the unit address, your name, the tenant's name, just a little bit of detail about what the problem is. And either myself, Emmy, Charlene, or one of the specialists will get back with you. If it's a repair or inspection issue, you can reach Mr. Love or Quinton. I think Mr. Love gave you his contact information in his slideshow. Our email addresses here are first name, period, last name @ohfa.org. and you can reach any of us supervisors by using that information. So there's several different ways to get into us. Let's see. Let's do one last question. Do we still send all proposed rent and utility allowance changes to you, or do we have to also send to the local offices? OHFA has one office, and that's located here in Oklahoma City. We are in a temporary location at 205 Northwest 63rd. We will be moving back to 100 Northwest 63rd next year, but that is our only office. You can send it to our post office box, which is 26720, Oklahoma City 73126. Or we have a drop box outside at the east entry of 205 Northwest 63rd. We have, our lobby is open from 8 to 4:45 daily at the Broadway Executive Park, Suite 140. Or you can mail it to the post office box. You can email it to one of our email addresses. But again, this office is the only office for OHFA. Okay.
I'll share my screen. Couple of things I would just like to bring up before, I think we've all kind of talked about it in some of the comments, is that the finance department does process your payments. I have about 95% of you that are on the assistance, are on direct deposit utilizing our ACH benefits. And I just need to remind you that HUD sends us money every month, and we have over 10,000 tenants. And we basically pay about $5 million across the state of Oklahoma every month. Those funds that we receive are received on the first working day of the month. And it's key to remember that it's the working day. It's not on the weekends, and it's not over a holiday. So as you saw, October the 3rd is the first working day of October. So your funds were released to you on Monday the 3rd. So yes, it'll take a day or so, see your postings. And then of course, if you are still on snail mail, then it'll take a couple more days to get them to you. All of your payments, whether you're on direct deposit or you're on a paper check, can be found with the distribution for your history and your tenants listings on a website that we have that we utilize with our software company. It's HAPCheck.com. H is in housing, A is in assistance, P is in payments, check, CHECK.com. And that is usually posted the night before, as Mary mentioned. It takes a lot to do a check run. We're trying to make sure that 10,000 tenants, all their information and all their updates are processed and there's nothing missing. So those that procedure is done usually the 28th, the 29th, depends on what day of the month it lands on and how many days in the month there are. So we do prepare all that information. It's ready, it's completed. And then when the first working day of the month comes, bam, it all goes out of here. It's got to be paid as quickly as possible. So those are when those payments happen. And as she said, quickly, if a tenant has a change and it didn't get done before that check run, it will be sitting in their queue, in their transactions report to pay the next time. And we usually process a mid-month check run around the 15th, 14th, somewhere around there. And so you may see some payments showing up into your HAPCheck that you got paid at a mid-month check run. And if we owe $50, then that's usually when it will get processed and paid to your accounts. Our email, real quickly, is rentalhapgroup@ohfa.org. That's rental, then HAP is in housing assistance payments again, the word group, and then @ohfa.org. So that's my group that answers all the questions on money and when you can get paid and if you didn't get paid. And we try to help you answer any questions, but we may have to transfer your calls to the leasing department because they're still working the file. They're responsible for making those changes and corrections before I can make payments. So I just kind of wanted to mention those kinds of things. And now I'll share my screen. Right, so Assistance Connect is a little bit different from our HAPCheck.com website. This is, like we mentioned, a portal, and it's online for both the tenant and the owner to communicate with us. Of course, any time of the day, anytime you're thinking of something that you want to have a question about. So for landlords, you will go to this Assistance Connect portal, and it's basically assistancecheck.com. And it's just a way that you can communicate, you can ask for things, and it's typically about payments from the finance staff of what we can help you with. To create this account, you need to go, of course, to this assistancecheck.com website. You'll need the tax ID number, whether it's your social security number or your EIN from the IRS for your company. And then a PIN number needs to be submitted to you to have submission. And you'll have to call in and get that if you don't have it. And it's specifically for a new owner to process those things, because you have to have the PIN first. You'll key that in, and then it'll ask you several different things. You'll go to this is the screen that you'll find, and you're gonna, the first time you go to this, you'll have to use a create the owner account. These are for the applicants and tenants. You're going to create the owner and use this to communicate with us. So it's prompting you to enter your tax ID number and then to add the PIN number. There are usually like 3 security questions that it has you to fill out, just like any other password that we have to work on and complete. And so I always suggest to landlords to use something simple, something part of your name. You know, a lot of mine are housing, Oklahoma City, finance, you know, something of that sort that's usable so that anybody in your office remembers it. It's not your favorite dog, it's not your favorite color, it's not where you were born. So use those things in common for that. So it's going to set up an account settings, and it'll ask you to set up their username, and then it'll ask for an email address. And just like as a business, I suggest that you use something that is company-wide. We have a family self-sufficiency program, and I have to monitor that. So I'm kind of like the owner of the family self-sufficiency page. Our email address is what I've used as a rentalhabgroup@ohfa.org. You know, my childhood number is the business number. What city? Oklahoma City. I was born in Oklahoma City. So simple things like that. You will be asked the questions, and then it's also going to send you an email after you enter all that information in, and it'll basically provide you an activation. So you get the activation, and then you sign in and you move forward. So some of the things you'll have to remember is you have to keep that email so everyone can see it. If it's a manager at, you know, XYZ property management, or, you know, if it's your personal one, it's gonna be your personal one. So this website is available to you at all times. And it shows up and it stays in there until we move it to the tenant's file or to communicate with something back to you. And they are secure messages, of course. Most of the times I would offer to review your payments. You didn't get a payment on a specific tenant. Maybe what's wrong? Were they in abatement? Do they have an annual that wasn't done? Something of that sort, or you were just expecting a different amount. You can send documents to this page, and just kind of like when you fax them, they are identified as single items so that we just assign it to the one tenant at a time. I can't break it down. I'd have to assign it just to a tenant. And then if you need to edit any contact information, your phone, your address is changed. We also have a form for you to fill out or mail to us if you do have a change of address, or of course you could call or send us an email of that. And then there are the Assistance Connect portal allows you to see the agency documents that are uploaded to the portal for your clients. And some letters that we have are not specifically uploaded they are still mailed to you. So that's why some items you'll call in and say, well, it's not on the portal. And that's because some of them are actually not uploaded because they're not compatible, they're too long, something of that sort. So some of it is still mailed to you, and but the other things are loaded up on that portal. And really, that's my short and sweet presentation. Again, my name is Gwen Shogren. It's Shogren, and of course, at ohfa.org. And then the email that we mentioned was rentalhapgroup@ohfa.org, so that you can communicate not only to me, but to the staff that's also working under me. One of the questions in the chat room was, I have a person that works on fraud, Stacy Golson, and if you have a question, if you have a concern or additional tenants, not only can you report that to the leasing staff, but if you want to report it to us for fraud, we will do our best to confidentially look that up, try to see what's happening with that client. And if they need to be, they will be terminated if they're violating the program. So we do have that option in our services. It does take a little bit of time because you do have to research them. We're not the police, but we will, offer to try to determine if they're violating any of our requirements on the program. So don't mean to be fast and furious, but that is really all I have. And I will stop sharing my screen. There we go. So I will look for any questions after this, and then when we have our questions and answers session again. So I'll give it back to Holly.
Okay, thank you, Gwen. So we will go back and then we will get to Amanda shortly. So Greg is here with legal aid. And so I will go ahead and put Greg in the spotlight. Thank you so much for being here, all of our guest speakers, but Greg is first on the agenda. So I will go ahead and hand it over to him.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Let me introduce myself. Yeah, I'm an attorney with Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma. I've been with Legal Aid as an attorney there since 2009. I started in our Lawton office, and now I'm in the Oklahoma City office. But during that time, I've worked with tenants and represented tenants in evictions in a number of different counties in the state. Right now, of course, primarily in Oklahoma County, and actually I get to work a little in Canadian County over in El Reno. So a number of different counties where OFA has Section 8 tenants themselves. And so I was asked to come on today to talk a little bit about working with tenants and about the eviction dockets in Oklahoma, and things in particular to look out for when it's a Section 8 situation. Is there are some differences in the way that's approached than with a landlord tenant situation without the subsidized voucher. There are different areas of law that apply. There's federal law, federal regulations governing not just the interactions that the landlord may have with OFA or the housing authority, but also the interactions between the landlord and the tenant themselves can be affected by federal laws that do not necessarily apply to the landlord and the tenant if they're just under a general lease without the subsidy. Then, of course, under federal law, we also have the Federal Fair Housing Act that may affect things. And then we have our state laws, our typical Residential Landlord Tenant Act, as something that we also look at when we're looking in these cases. And then, aside from the specific laws that affect these cases, your contracts also affect these cases. And this is sort of a unique situation when you have, compared to general landlord tenant situations, you just have the one contract between the landlord and the tenant. But really these Section 8 cases involve three contracts, and they're between the three different parties. There's the housing authority, or OFA in this instance, Oklahoma Housing Finance Agency. There's the landlord, and then there's the tenant. And each of those two parties has a contract, has rights and obligations between each of the other parties. So you, the landlord, have your contract with OFA and a different contract, a lease with the tenant the tenant also has a contract with OFA, and they have the lease with you. And so all of these contracts sort of work together to create this housing situation. And all of these contracts come into play if you're taking a tenant to court and you're alleging a violation. The rights and obligations of any of these contracts may affect the court case at hand. So each party owes the other rights and duties. Each is providing a service to the other party in these situations. And, say you reach a point where the tenant violates or fails to live up to their obligations. They can fail to live up to their obligations to OFA. And at that time, OFA may have their own processes where they move to terminate the voucher. And when that happens, the tenant has their own rights to administrative hearing in most cases. And you of course will be notified along the way as a landlord, and you'll know if OFA moves to terminate the voucher payments, they'll let everybody know, and you and the tenant will know, hey, tenant, you're on your own at this point. You need to make up the full payment. So you will be very fully aware of that. But of course, the tenant will have their own rights with OFA. They can ask for administrative hearings, and we've advised people on that. We've also represented tenants on time to time with that, with OFA and with some of the other housing authorities. Now, when it comes to you personally, this is where you get into the Residential Landlord-Tenant Act. If a tenant fails to live up to their obligations in one way or another, with you, the landlord, that either they violate the lease or it can be some other violation of the Residential Landlord-Tenant Act, the contract or the law, then you'll have your rights and remedies. And that's when you're in the potential realm of an eviction in Oklahoma. And we can talk for a second in general about evictions in Oklahoma. Oklahoma in general, compared to other states, Oklahoma is in many ways a landlord-friendly state. Our evictions move extremely fast. A few years ago, there was a reporter who studied all 50 states and how quickly somebody can go from, say, missing a rental payment to being locked out of their home through the eviction process. I think Oklahoma was in the top 5 fastest, depending on when the first of the month falls and when you get to the courthouse. You could have somebody evicted in theory within about 10 days. In many other states, it's a much longer process, much longer. It can take months in some other states. And then along with that, there was further study done by the Eviction Lab. Matthew Desmond, I think a sociologist out of Princeton, did this reporting and this study a few years ago that gained a lot of attention. And as part of his data and study, he looked at the worst eviction rates in terms of how many tenants are evicted and what percentage of cases result in eviction in big cities around the nation. And Tulsa and Oklahoma City were both in the top 20 for worst eviction rates around the nation. Of course, since that time, we have had a pandemic. And then we had a number of things during the pandemic that affected the way evictions were happening the past few years. First, the courthouses closed for a few months. And then when they reopened, everything was moving slowly, and the federal government stepped in a number of ways to limit evictions. First was the CARES Act, which didn't necessarily affect every landlord-tenant situation in Oklahoma, but it definitely affected Section 8 situations with Oklahoma Housing Finance Agency. It also affected any property that was maybe under a federally backed mortgage. So FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac residences that were backed by a mortgage under those agencies. Those were affected by the CARES Act, and they had certain rules and regulations. And then those rules and regulations expired, and then we went to the CDC moratorium. And many of you maybe recall the CDC moratorium, which under certain circumstances prevented landlords from evicting people for non-payment of rent. They could still evict for other lease violations. And so we had the CDC moratorium for a while. And then along with all of this, we also had the rental assistance, which was great because the rental assistance, I know a lot of people were frustrated by how slowly it moved. and still moves. They're not taking, Community Cares Partners isn't taking new applications, but they're still processing past applications. And I know it was frustrating for people with how slowly it moved, but in a lot of cases, it got both sides what they wanted. We avoided the eviction, and the landlord was able to get their money. So that was a pretty good way of going about things. But now we've moved past these protections that we had for tenants during the pandemic, and we're slowly running out of those new applications for Community Cares Partners and rental assistance. And what we're seeing in terms of numbers here in Oklahoma County, I can tell you, is that evictions are on the rise. The peaks, there's an ebb and flow in any given month for eviction filings in Oklahoma in general. The first few weeks of the month, it's generally pretty slow. Then by the time and then it starts to pick up in the third and the fourth week. And in the final week of each month, that's when we hit our peak. And the peaks that we're hitting now are higher than the peaks we were hitting pre-pandemic. So we're not just getting back to now that the protections are gone, it's not just that we're getting to the pre-pandemic levels of evictions, we're breaking through the pre-pandemic levels of evictions. Last Thursday in Oklahoma County, there was a docket with over 300 eviction cases, which was the largest that anybody could remember pre or post pandemic. Robert Goldman, one of the busiest landlord attorneys in Oklahoma County, he's been doing it for a very long time, said that he couldn't remember ever seeing a docket that busy. So that's where we're currently at with evictions right now. And so, how do you get there if you're a landlord? Well, first off, let me tell you, as an attorney, we have to make clear that I'm not going to advise on any specific set of facts or circumstances. I can't give you advice. And if you're looking for advice, please, hire an attorney or contact an attorney. But I want to talk about, in general, the Landlord Tenant Act, how it works, and what happens with the eviction process. So first, there's a lease violation. Something that your tenant should have done or should not have done has occurred. And under the law or under the lease, you have the right to initiate this process. And the process is initiated by written notice. The most important thing for landlords or tenants to know is that written notice is key for either side to enforce their rights. You start with a written notice. And the type of written notice will vary depending on the type of violation. So if there's a non-payment of rent, and in this situation, the non-payment of rent would just be the tenant portion. By law and by the contract with OFA or any number of the other housing authorities around the state, if something happened with the voucher payment because it's an abatement or something like that, you cannot ask for that money from the tenant. And if you try to evict on that basis, we'll be able to defend that. We'll point out the law. And I think we can also point out what's generally called the HAP contract. The HAP contract will also say that you're agreeing that you will not go after the tenant for the housing authority portion. So if the property's in abatement, let's say, for the housing authority payment or the OFA payment, you cannot try to evict the tenant for that portion of the payment. But say the tenant didn't make their portion of the payment, well, then you start with a 5-day notice. You serve them personally with a 5-day written notice for non-payment of rent. And if and only if you cannot serve them personally, then you can do posting and mailing. I know a lot of landlords cut straight to posting and mailing. A lot of property managers just do the posting, the certified mail. But that's not what the law says. The law says you need to start by trying to personally serve them with these notices. So you personally serve them the 5-day notice. If it's some other material non-compliance with the lease, but say it's not something so bad as threatening the health or safety of other people, then you have to give them a 10-day notice. You give them a 10-day notice and a chance to correct. And the 5-day notice is a chance to correct also. If they pay you within the 5 days, or if you serve them notice and they correct what other lease violation within the 10 days, then the problem's solved. And if you try to take that to court, then the tenant says, well, okay, I did get that notice. I did have the lease violation. I did get that notice. And then I took these steps to address the situation. Well, then you're not owed an eviction at that point. Then there are other situations with a much faster notice. There can be a 48-hour notice or an immediate termination if there's some sort of more very serious lease violation, either a criminal activity that threatens health and safety or some other activity that threatens health and safety, or drug activity that threatens health and safety, I think is specific language. And then there can also be a 30-day notice if your written lease has expired. And then you can, in theory, give a 30-day notice to terminate the month-to-month tenancy. Now that notice could actually go down to a 7-day notice. Say if you had a situation where your tenant was paying by the week, but I think if you've initiated a voucher contract, then that's usually 30 days. So that would be a 30-day notice. So those are your notices, and you cannot take a case to court until you've served the proper notice to lay the foundation. Or if you try to do, that would be a defense on the other side to say, the court lacks jurisdiction if you haven't initiated the court case with the proper notice first. So then you do the proper notice and you get into court, and then the court dockets, they almost all work the same way, no matter what county you're in. I can tell you how it will go when you get to the court that day. So you get to your courtroom, and it'll either be, depending on the county, it might be eviction only, or they might merge the evictions with the small claims docket. And you'll see a bunch of other types of cases in there. In any small claims or eviction docket, the judges invariably, they'll call the docket. They will tell you what's going on, what they expect. They'll see who's here and who's not here. Generally, they tell you to, if both sides are here, they'll tell you to step out in the hall and see if you can work something out, see if the parties can talk through it. They will expect you to share your evidence then. Judges will, in the legal profession, we use the phrase trial by ambush. Nobody likes trial by ambush. It's not fair to the side that's getting ambushed. And so the judges will tell the sides, especially in these cases, because these cases, this is litigation, but it's litigation that doesn't have discovery. So the judges will tell the sides that, when you go out in the hall, when you talk to them, you should be sharing your evidence. You should be like, this is what I have on my side. And the other side needs to tell you, this is what I have on my side. That will put everybody on the same ground for negotiating and maybe get better results for both sides. And then the judges will, as they're going through this talk, telling you what to expect, they'll tell you, if you can't come to an agreement, you can come to us, or they might send you to mediation too. But then you get to that point and you have your hearing, and and generally you're the landlord, you're asking for this eviction. So you have the burden of proof. You have to prove your case. You should have your notices, not just for the initial lease violation notice, but you should also, be able to prove your court notices, how you served your summons and things like that, especially if it's a default, the judge is going to want to know that. If it's a non-payment of rent case, you should have your ledger. You should show connected dots to show why this tenant owes you the amount of money that you're alleging in the petition. And then, it'll turn into people's court, basically. In general, a lot of times there aren't attorneys involved, but even if there are attorneys involved, these are fast hearings. These will be, he said, she said hearings. Everybody will get to the point. If we're involved, we will argue areas of law where we have to, but a lot of times if there's no legal defenses, then we just get into those factual based discussions, and the witnesses will testify and we'll see what happened. And then if you get judgment, if the defendant wins, typically it's just a dismissal. That's it, the case is dismissed. If you win as the plaintiff seeking judgment, you will be awarded judgment. The judge will make it clear, and they will give you a document with a journal entry. In general, it'll either grant you possession or it may grant you possession and rent. And the rent should be prorated through that day of the hearing. Say it's October 5th right now. If somebody's at the docket today getting judgment for possession and rent, they're not going to get rent for all of October when they're, evicting the client today. They will get prorated rent through today, but that'll be it. The next steps for you as a landlord, if you get judgment, is to file what's called a writ of assistance. And that's the next phase. The next phase of the process is the judge will sign an order for the sheriff to initiate this process. There's a judge in Oklahoma County who always says there are no such things as a self-help eviction. You are not to, unless you come to an agreement with your tenant on your own, you are not to change the locks on your tenant. You're not to be the one doing the evicting. The sheriffs in the state of Oklahoma evict people. And it starts with the writ of assistance. The sheriff will, the judge will sign an order directing the sheriff to do this. And then the sheriff will post a notice on the door and try to personally serve the tenant with the initial notice for their part, which is in general a 48-hour notice. But a lot of our sheriff departments are overburdened. So sometimes this 48-hour notice can end up being longer notice. But they will post a notice and it'll notify the tenant when the sheriff will be back. And when the sheriff comes back that second time around, that's when possession changes hands. Even if the tenant hasn't gotten everything out of that unit or house, the tenant will be asked to leave and possession will then legally turn back over to the landlord. And as a landlord, if you get to that point, then as a landlord, you also need to be aware of what to do with the personal property left behind. Now, there is a landlord's lien statute. If the tenant owes you money, you can have a lien on the personal property. Now, the lien has certain restrictions. The property has to be as close in value as practical to the money owed. If a tenant only owes you $100, you don't get to control $2,000 worth of their personal property, right? And then there are certain types of property that are exempt from lien. And that we've had to, unfortunately, get into some arguments with some landlords about this, but you don't get to put a lien on. I mean, I think this is pretty common sense, but you can't withhold a tenant's medication, food, in general, kitchen, things you eat with, kitchen items and appliances, clothing. You can't put a lien on stuff like that. You could put a lien on other furniture, not bedding, but other furniture or, electronics. I think it's pretty easy to see the difference. There is a statute directly on point that lays out these categories, but it's pretty clear is if it's stuff that somebody needs to live with, then no, you don't get to hold on to that against the tenant's wishes. Now, what if you don't hear from the tenant? I know this happens. The tenant is evicted and they're gone, and you've got to figure out what to do with their stuff. Now, you're afraid you're going to get in trouble if you just throw it away, and you're potentially correct there. If a tenant disappears and then comes back a week later, and you've already disposed of their stuff, that could be problems for you in terms of a small claims case. Now, you're only obligated to hold it for up to 30 days. You're only obligated to hold it for up to 30 days, and you can charge a reasonable storage fee. So you do have options, but once the 30 days are up, if you haven't heard from the tenant, then you could potentially dispose of those items. That's kind of a sticky area. There are some details here and there that you need to be aware of. But there are statutes directly on point in the Oklahoma Landlord Tenant Act on that situation. And, of course, you can contact an attorney on what best to do if you have a specific situation that you're worried about. So then you've got the eviction, you've got, hopefully one way or another, dispose of the property. And then you've got potentially, if you're the landlord, and this person is indebted to you, you may also be worried about debt collection practices, but you should be aware of potential issues with the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act and Fair Credit Reporting Act. You need to be sure that if you're hiring a property management company to manage this, then that property management company is a third-party debt collector, and they need to be aware of the Fair Credit Reporting Act because they may violate it if they do certain practices that violate that federal law. And then in either case, you need to be careful about how you report things to a credit agency You need to make sure that that's accurate information that you're passing along. Tenants are getting very concerned about these situations because right now, a lot of tenants are having a hard time finding places. They're having a hard time with background checks. If you're providing false information that's affecting a tenant's ability to rent a new place, you may have potential claims against you from that tenant. So you should be aware of that. I'm not saying you can't report that, of course, but just make sure it's accurate and make sure you're following the steps that need to be followed. But other than that, I mean, I am excited about this landlord fair. I'm excited about OFA reaching out because we're on the same side. We're wanting to increase access to housing for people in Oklahoma. There's, a lot of vouchers out there, a lot of people with vouchers out there who we hear from too, who are having a hard time finding a landlord. I think vouchers are great in a lot of ways for the landlord. That payment's going to come from OFA. If you do your side of the things, you're guaranteed payment from OFA. Whereas sometimes with other tenants who don't have that subsidy behind them, maybe you're a little worried about whether or not you're going to see that payment. So I think it's a great relationship. And I know some landlords who've had tenants on vouchers for years and years. And right now, but Dan's going to talk about this in a second. But there are a lot of tenants having a hard time right now using their voucher and finding somebody to use it. And we also on the docket, I'll talk about, we still, CCP is going away, but we partner with a lot of other agencies and trying to find solutions for landlords and tenants and trying to avoid evictions. We're there, we'll defend an eviction if we have to, but a lot of times we negotiate. We negotiate payment plans, or we negotiate continuances with the hearing so that we can connect the tenants with other services. So yes, CCP isn't taking new applications right now, but I can tell you we work with Homeless Alliance. We're working with them right now. And we have tenants who qualify for Homeless Alliance. They have provided case managers for us to contact from the docket in order to avoid evictions. And we're seeing some good results with that. We're seeing landlords who are excited about that. We're seeing some landlords who are they don't want to evict these tenants because they're just behind a month or two with somebody they've had for a long time. And they want to find a way to avoid the eviction. And we're still able to work with some other organizations to connect tenants to the assistance and get that assistance to the landlords so they can get paid for doing their part. And everybody walks away happy. And if we can get to that situation, that's where we start with things. But so that's sort of a general overview on what I have as an attorney for tenants. Dealing with evictions and dealing with evictions right now in Oklahoma. But, I'm available if anybody has any questions right now, any general questions or any discussion, like to open it up, I guess.
Thank you, Greg. We appreciate it. If you have any questions for Greg, if you could stick those in the Q&A section. And what is your contact information in case someone wanted to get in touch with you after the meeting?
Oh yeah, they can email me. I'll type it in the chat.
Okay, perfect.
And our application information. We have an application hotline.
That's
Yeah.
wonderful. We do have a question in the chat that I think it's possible that you could answer, but someone said that they have an OHFA tenant who received money from Community Care Partners in error, and it was supposed to go to the landlord. And they've been trying to get in touch with the tenant and they're not answering. So they're trying to figure out what to do next. They've contacted our fraud department. So do you have any advice as far as that goes?
Right. So when they do tenant pay, when CCP does tenant pay, the tenant signs an agreement that they understand that this money has to go to the landlord. I'm not sure. Usually it only gets to tenant pay if there's some issue with contacting the landlord or something like that. So I'm not sure how it got there. But unfortunately, I mean, in that situation, you may have a claiming, you still have a claiming against the tenant for the rent because you haven't been paid your rent. Now, as far as the issue between the landlord and CCP, I don't know if the landlord could do anything directly to CCP to force them to give them that money. It's still, the CCP is still sort of this third party, not really connected. The contract was signed between CCP and the tenant in that situation, not CCP and the landlord. So really the landlord has to focus on what they want to do with the tenant in that situation.
Okay, thank you. And then this one, does OHFA prevent tenants from gaining a new voucher to search if they owe us unpaid rent or damages, and we have a court order that states their unpaid rent?
Well, in general, if a tenant is evicted while they're on a voucher, they may be barred from receiving subsidized housing for 3 years. Now, there are situations where that has happened, where we've had administrative hearings to explain the set of circumstances, and maybe a particular housing authority looking at the individual circumstances might sort of waive that 3-year period and let them back on subsidized housing. But, federal law says, I think it's 3 years. If you're evicted while on a voucher, you can't be receive a new subsidy for 3 years. So not just OHFA, but any of the other housing authorities would be aware of that and abide by those rules.
Okay, and this is more of an observation, but a tenant can still appear on a posted service. And if they choose not to show to court, the landlord will not get a money judgment. As a landlord, a personal service is beneficial and preferred.
Yes, in general, that's a very good point, because you can get, in other cases, like in mortgage foreclosures, it's called in rem and in personam, Latin phrases for lawyers. But in rem is sort of jurisdiction over the property. So when you post in mail, you just sort of provided notice, like physically to the property, right? Think of it that way. But that doesn't mean you can touch the tenant's bank account. So personal service, you've achieved jurisdiction over the person. And then in theory, their bank account is also threatened if they owe you money. So that's a very good point, because personal service, if somebody owes you money, especially if it's a lot of money, you might want to think about putting the extra effort in to getting that personal service, so you can get that personal jurisdiction and potentially that money judgment.
Okay, and then this one, does the speaker or OHFA staff have any information on why the community cares applications are taking so long?
It's because of the volume. I would say it's because of the volume. And I
It
don't know,
went from 0 to 75,000 households assisted with over $300 million in 24 months. And it just, it just got ahead. I mean, spending $300 million in 24 months when you didn't exist as an organization prior to that, it's just been a challenge. They certainly recognize and track how long each application is taking, and nobody is satisfied with how long it's taking. But the streamlining of the processes has gone about as far as it can go and still meet all Treasury's guidelines for fraud detection and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you, Dan. And this is a question really for both of you. Dan Straughan has joined the call, and he will be our next speaker. He's from the Homeless Alliance. But someone asked if they should send potential evictions to legal aid to get connected with the Homeless Alliance or directly to the Homeless Alliance.
I would say directly to the Homeless Alliance. We can't make things happen any faster than contacting Homeless Alliance directly, and also depending on where you are in the state, the funds Homeless Alliance is using are HUD funds, ESG funds, for preventing homelessness. These ESG funds are available throughout continuums of care throughout the state. And in general, if you're not sure what organizations in your part of the state might have access to these funds, in general, start with 211. Or ask your tenants to start with 211. And if they qualify 211, it's what they're here for. They'll connect people to the right organizations that can help. But then, Dan can talk about best ways for a tenant to reach out to Homeless Alliance, I think.
Okay, and then we just have a couple more before Dan's presentation starts. And I think it's beneficial since both of you all are dealing in this space. How How does eviction work if you are rent to own and are behind on payments with property tax and insurance?
Well, from the tenant side, if there's a rent to own situation, we have in the past, there's a process for the tenant to file an affidavit that they potentially have an ownership interest in the property. When they file the affidavit that they have a potential ownership interest, that case is removed from the fast-paced eviction docket to a civil docket, to a larger case. It could become a case in what's called ejectment, or potentially a mortgage foreclosure type of case. But either way, because those cases are more detailed, I think this is why the law has said these need to be removed to a different type of case. And that's when you get into things like discovery. Everybody can pull all the paperwork or any depositions or witnesses if needed. It's more complicated, but if there's a rent to own, then it should not be in this hyper-paced docket where somebody could lose their ownership interest in 10 days and walk away with nothing. And also, if it's a rent to own situation, I don't think, OHFA has their home ownership programs and things like that, but it's typically that would not be a Section 8 voucher situation.
Okay. And then the last question in the chat before we go to Dan's presentation, if a tenant is on a month-to-month lease, can you serve the 30-day notice to terminate the lease in the middle of the month with the lease expiring in the middle of the next month? For example, serve 30-day notice on October 5th, citing lease terminate November 5th, or does it have to end on the last day of the month?
That's a very good question. I think best practices would be to, when we advise a tenant on serving a 30-day notice, we advise them to try to line it up with the rental period, with the month. We don't have any specification with residential case law on this. There was an Oklahoma commercial landlord tenant case that said it needs to line up with a month. But, if you look at Title 41, there's the Commercial Landlord Tenant Act, and then the Residential Landlord Tenant Act is separate. And there's a lot of differences, very clear differences. So it's hard to say, because of the differences in the law, it's hard to say that because an appellate court said that the commercial lease has to line up with the rental period, first of the month, then that would apply to the residential situation. That's not necessarily the case. We really don't know. But if you want to be extra careful, you might want to try to line it up with the beginning of the month. But depending on the situation, that might vary for you. And I can't say for sure that you can't do that. We just
I want to speak on behalf of that question, Holly.
Okay, go ahead.
If you're referring to the HAP contract, when you give notice, whether it's on October 5th and it's going to be up November 5th, as long as the tenant is living in the unit and the unit has met all housing quality standards and there's a paying contract, OHFA's responsibility is to pay that landlord through the end of the month in which the tenant moves. And if you have to do a writ on the tenant, then you need to furnish that paperwork to show us when the tenant was actually removed from the unit, and OHFA will pay through the end of the month in which the tenant moved out.
Thank you, Mary.
And of course, in that situation, we might have some arguments if we know, hey, OHFA paid for the full month, maybe you don't get the right to evict somebody on the 15th. We would use that on our side.
Thank you so much, Greg, for your time this morning. We greatly appreciate it. We had some good questions. Will you be sticking around in case anyone has any more, or if you need to bolt, then we have your contact information in the chat, and we will be sharing that with attendees after this session this morning.
Yeah, you can ask me questions afterward. I've got another appointment I need to get to, but yeah.
Well, we greatly appreciate you spending part of your day with us. It was very informative, and thank you for your partnership with us.
Awesome.
So we do have another a question in the chat, but we can address that later if it's one. I haven't had the chance to read it, if it's one that pertains to you or to someone else. But thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, now we are going to turn it over to Dan Straughan, who is the Executive Director of the Homeless Alliance. And so I'm going to go ahead and give him the spotlight, and he can share some information about the Homeless Alliance and what their role is.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you all for letting me come speak with you briefly today. So I am the exec and the founder of the Homeless Alliance. We're an Oklahoma City-based not-for-profit, and we do a lot of things. So we facilitate collaboration between the 100+ government, faith-based, and nonprofit entities working with people experiencing homelessness in Central Oklahoma. We have some social enterprises, some of them you may have heard of: Curbside Chronicle, Curbside Flowers, Curbside Apparel, and Sasquatch snow cone stands to provide employment opportunities for the clients that we serve. And we run Oklahoma City's only general use day shelter that saw about 9,000 unduplicated clients in calendar 2021. But the biggest and most important part of what we do is provide housing for people who are experiencing homelessness, or in some cases at risk of homelessness. In calendar 2021, we provided housing and supportive services to 858 new households, and our total households served during that year was 1,882. We only own 20 units of housing, a little apartment complex on the east end of our block. So the other 1,862, we're working with local landlords all day, every day to place our clients into units. We call that scattered site. We provide housing programs that we have prevention, homelessness prevention programs, short-term, which we call rapid rehousing. And so, you know, that may be something as simple as first month's rent and deposit, or we can actually, in a rapid rehousing scenario, we can go as long as 2 years in providing rent and case management services. But most of the people that we serve in rapid rehousing have relatively low barriers to housing. And so if we can help them with first month's rent and deposit, or maybe first 3 months rent and some utility assistance, at the end of that relatively short period, they're entirely self-sustaining, and they don't need our financial assistance or our case management assistance beyond that. A lot of the folks that we serve, though, have higher barriers to housing. And so we call that permanent supportive housing. And for those tenants, we're mostly master leasing units out in the community and then sublease them to our clients. And the benefit to a landlord with an arrangement like that is that A, you get guaranteed payment, and B, you get a case manager's number that you can call when there are problems. And then the case manager can hopefully address those problems before there's any kind of need to go to court or anything like that. So that is kind of it in a nutshell, I should say, mainly because I'm really old and I've been around a long time. The reason I jumped in on the question about Community Cares Partnership is I am on their advisory council, so been involved with that since the beginning, and super sensitive to the issues that have come up over the course of those 2 years. Although justifiably proud of what Jenny Bass-Carl and Teresa Rose and Aubrey McDermott have done. The real challenge in Oklahoma City right now is just the availability of affordable housing. And so just like with an OFA voucher or an OCHA voucher, the units that we either master lease or that we assist someone with like first month's rent and deposit and those sorts of things. Those units have to meet the same criteria that they would have to meet if there was an OFA voucher involved. So HUD's housing quality standards and HUD's fair market rent standards also apply to the assistance that we're able to provide, because ours are also mostly federal grants that come from HUD, flow through the city of Oklahoma City, and then come to agencies like mine. And through the years, we have had, it's been kind of a seesaw, right? So we have units available, but we don't have enough case management staff. And then 6 months after that, we have plenty of case management staff, but there's no units available. And right now, it's the lack of units that is slowing us down. So kind of my pitch to you all is being willing to consider clients of ours and City Rescue Mission and North Care and the other housing providers in Oklahoma City, because you do get that case management assistance. I could literally talk about this all day, but I know we have kind of a short time frame, and I wanted to give people an opportunity to ask questions if you have them.
That they would like to put, does anyone have any questions that they would like to place in the chat about Homeless Alliance or its services? Or their role in evictions? That sounded like that was a big part of your mission right now as well.
It is, and one of the sort of interesting things is prior to the CARES 1 and 2 and the ARPA funding, we, Homeless Alliance and the other housing providers in Oklahoma City, had very little prevention money. Funders, just including HUD, just didn't fund prevention efforts because it's really hard to prove your outcomes. It's really hard to prove that but for this assistance, that family would have become homeless. So there just wasn't a lot of prevention money out there. With CARES 1 and CARES 2 and ARPA, there is prevention money. And so, but it's limited. So we have to have a 5-day to quit or a 30-day eviction notice before we can assist. And so we've had staff at the eviction court docket along with CCP staff and legal aid staff to provide that assistance. But if you have tenants that are at risk of eviction, I just really encourage them to call us. We'll do an assessment. We can do it over the phone. And oftentimes we're able to help. Like all federal grants, there are limitations. So, income qualifications and that sort of thing. So we have to walk our way through that, but we do have funds, at least temporarily for the next 12 months or so, to do eviction prevention work.
We do have some questions in the chat specifically for you. So the first one is, do you have a proposition for the lack of housing? What answers do you have for that?
So part of it is just there has not been a great deal of investment in developing affordable housing in Oklahoma City over the last literally decade. So, if you drive around downtown, you see all these new apartment complexes coming up, and that stuff is in no way affordable to the 135,000 people in Oklahoma County that live at or below the poverty line. So, most of that stuff downtown, most of my staff would not be able to afford to live in, much less my clients. So that's been the largest issue. Is just over the last decade, we have not, as a community, incentivize the development of truly affordable multifamily housing. At the same time, over the last 2 years, you've had a lot of out-of-state investors snapping up some properties and prices going up. And as our federal grants stay at the same amount, as prices increase, even though OFA or HUD will actually increase the fair market allowable rent, with the same amount of money, it doesn't go as far if the costs are going up. So that is also part of the problem. As a community, we just haven't incentivized that with the development of affordable housing. And housing developers know that their margins are wider on more expensive housing than they are on affordable housing. So I think statutorily or at the municipal code level, finding a way to incentivize development of that kind of housing will help. And part of MAPS 4 will help. It's got $50 million to develop more truly affordable housing. And we think we can leverage that to triple or even quadruple the total amount with federal matching funds. But, you know, that's a 10-year out process. And I will say, Oklahoma City today is where cities like San Diego and Portland and Seattle were a decade or a decade and a half ago. And those cities did not have the foresight to invest in truly affordable housing. And now they have multi-billion-dollar problems. And I think we're ahead of that curve, but there's a lot of work to do to catch up.
Okay, just a few more questions that we have. Tenants in Comanche County, is there a resource, or does the Homeless Alliance reach that far?
So the Homeless Alliance does not. And I would echo Greg's suggestion of that tenant should call 211 and they can say, this is my zip code, and 211 could tell you the Homeless Alliance of Comanche County is this agency. Call them.
Okay, and how should, and at OHFA, we get calls from people who are homeless from time to time. So what is the best way to have a tenant or someone who is homeless reach out to the Homeless Alliance?
Sure. So they can come here. Obviously, we have the whole block at 3rd and Kentucky, or 3rd and Virginia, rather. They can call. Our main number, I'll put it in the chat, is just 405-415-8410. We'll do an assessment over the phone or in person if they show up in person. And that assessment tells us a couple of things. What agencies are best for you to work with. So like if you're a veteran or a person who's fleeing domestic violence or a transition age youth, different agencies working through that. And it also tells us through that assessment what kind of housing intervention you really need, whether it's prevention or rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. And depending on the population demographic, like veterans, we can move through the system really fast. Families with children, a little slower. Transition age youth, also a little more challenging right now. Yeah, I'd just reach out to the Homeless Alliance either on phone or through the website. It's just homelessalliance.org, or call.
Thank you. There are a few more questions in the chat. For the interest of time, I will go ahead and let you address those in there. And then if you will also put your contact information in there, that would be great. The contact information for the Homeless Alliance. But thank you so much. This was very informative. We appreciate you being here with us this morning and spending time with our property managers. And we greatly appreciate the work of the Homeless Alliance. We're all in this together. So thank you so much, Dan.
You bet. It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, I am going to now turn it over to, she has been waiting and I don't have my agenda up. I apologize. So I'm going to turn it over to Amanda Aunko. She has been with us this morning, and thank you so much. You've been here since the beginning, so thank you. And we are looking forward to hearing what you have to say about the National Resource Center for Youth Services. This is an organization that I had the pleasure of interviewing one of your participants a few years ago, who was able to obtain housing through our partnership with you. And so I'm going to go ahead and shine the spotlight on you. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Holly. I really appreciate you guys inviting me to be here with you today. I am here to talk to you about a unique partnership that our organization has with OFA, also in partnership with the Oklahoma Department of Human Services. So to give a little bit of context prior to discussing what that partnership looks like, the National Resource Center for Youth Services is through the University of Oklahoma. We are a contracted agent of OKDHS to provide services to young adults who are transitioning from Oklahoma foster care. So we're working with those young adults who are in the trajectory to age out of foster care in the state of Oklahoma. We are also working with them up to the age of 21, and we have some supports for them beyond that age as well. So we work collectively with DHS to identify who those young adults are, to help provide these types of services through our program. Our services are aimed at helping these young adults in that transition in areas of education, employment, and then where my role comes in is as a housing navigator. So we realize that young adults who are leaving care did not have as many viable housing options as they should have. And so my role was created to go out across the state of Oklahoma to try to identify housing partnerships and housing opportunities for these young adults. In my job, I am a statewide employee, and so I'm trying to connect with communities all across Oklahoma to connect with continuums of care, housing authorities, service providers, and landlords and project managers. What I try to do with those programs is to give them education about what it means to be a young adult who is leaving foster care in the state of Oklahoma and what their needs are when it comes to finding housing. As we can all imagine what it's like when we move out our first time into our own home, many of us have had support systems in place that helped us to make that type of transition. The young adults that we are serving do not always have those types of supports to help them in that transition. And so that is where our program comes into place. The way that this program operates in the state of Oklahoma is we operate a 1-800 number. Any young adult who is leaving or has left foster care can contact that 1-800 number to express that they have a need for housing, that they have housing instability. At that point, our helpline is going to complete a housing assessment with that young adult to determine which programs they are eligible for. One of the program options that is available is a Housing Choice Voucher through OFA. OFA has special programs that are designed to meet foster youth's needs, and HUD also recognized the need for young adults leaving foster care and created unique voucher programs for them. So what happens is when a young adult calls that helpline, completes a housing assessment, if they're determined to meet the criteria for a housing voucher, we work with them to complete the appropriate paperwork, and we send the referral to OFA. Anyone who has navigated that system knows that sometimes that can be very comprehensive. It might not be things that young adults necessarily know how to navigate on their own. That's where our partnership with OFA comes into play. We have connections with their specialists to answer questions directly for our young adults. And then we help foster that relationship with giving that information to the young adult. Once they do receive a voucher, they still have to go out and identify the property. Just like you've heard the Homeless Alliance saying, just because they're issued a voucher doesn't mean that they're able to identify the property. Our organization, much like the Homeless Alliance and other service providers, we do have unique funding to help the young adults in some of those upfront costs, but we still need help in identifying the landlords. And so that is where I'm here to have an ask on. We are trying to identify what we call youth-friendly landlords. The knowledge that a young adult is not coming out with high credit scores that may have to be met for housing. They often do not have the references that may be required for them to meet the housing. And they may not have the 3 times the income limits to meet the housing. And so we are trying to work with landlords to identify where we may be able to connect, inform you about our services, and see if that is a good fit. If it is, then what we do is we put you into our youth-friendly landlord resource list, so that any young adult that's calling us that's eligible for a voucher, or even outside of just the vouchers, that is looking for housing on their own, we can give them that list and we help refer them to you. So the things that we are able to do to help support that is, just like the Homeless Alliance, our young adults do have case management services. They have an adult that can be contacted that can help them navigate some of those paperwork things. What does it mean to be a first-time tenant? How do I speak to my landlord? How do I handle paying my utilities? How do I handle paying my rent? We have utility assistance through our program. We have rental assistance through our program that can subsidize until their voucher kicks in. And then we also have the ability to help them with things to help furnish their homes. So we help them with whatever would be in most of our homes, furniture, bathroom supplies, kitchen things, bedroom things. So we are also trying to make that home, their first home, as comfortable as possible for them as they transition into that adulthood and into that independence. As you can imagine, young adults need this support. When they do not receive this support, they end up as adults who may be in a homeless situation and encountering those other programs within our communities. So we very much appreciate when we do find landlords who are willing to work with a young adult population. We know that you all have hearts for serving your communities. That's why you're here today. And so that's where we're trying to reach out and connect with you to help serve these populations. So before I go, what I will do is I will share with you how you can connect with me. What I would ask is, if you do think that you are someone who is interested in being a youth-friendly landlord and would like to connect with our program further, these are our email contacts at oxa@ou.edu. The number listed there is our 1-800 number. And then we've also listed our program website below. If you do reach out to the program, I would ask that you identify that you are a landlord who is wanting to connect with our program, so that they can connect you to me, the housing navigator. And from there, we will reach out, we'll get information about what your properties look like, and then we will talk to you about what it means to be involved with our youth-friendly landlord resource list. So I appreciate your time today. And that is all that I have. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Holly.
You're still muted, Holly.
You would think this was my first time to use Zoom. Sorry about the, I had myself muted. If you have questions for Amanda, if you would post those in the chat. How many participants do you have in your program, Amanda?
So I don't have an exact number. I think right now we have like 240 young adults in our program. It doesn't mean that all of those young adults are trying to access housing services. I would say the young adults that are trying to access housing services is probably closer to the like 100 range, but it's still quite a high number across the state of young adults who are trying to find those housing pathways and affordable housing for them.
Okay, wonderful. And this kind of goes along with a question that was asked of Dan, but I think we could also ask it of you. Is it okay to assign property that's specifically for these young people, or how does that work?
That would be a question for OFA, and whether you could deem a property specific for a youth. I will tell you that our young adults are coming just as green to the housing as some of the other people that you may be working with that are in the adult population. So that is something to consider, is just knowing that they may not have that knowledge or that experience to be good tenants at this point. That's part of where we're preparing and trying to help educate them, and then also educate our landlords. So I guess that would be a question for OFA and whether a landlord could deem it a property specifically for.
Actually, I would like to say that it's probably going to be legal aid. That's going to be some kind of legal question, because we don't care as long as the property is owned by an individual, but you get into fair housing and discrimination. And so I would say they probably need to ask that question of an attorney.
Any other questions for Amanda? Okay, thank you so much. And she has placed her contact information in the chat, and the chat information will be sent after this meeting. So thank you so much. We appreciate your time. Thank you for spending the morning with us. We appreciate it. And thank you for what you do for the young people of our state.
Yes.
You're welcome. Thank you all for everything you do as well.
Now we are at the end of our meeting, and so we do have a couple of questions that have come up in the chat, and some of these are repeats because maybe someone had to step away or take a phone call. So I will just go ahead and go through these, and then if any of the panelists, whoever wants to answer, that would be great.
I have a question for you, Holly, before you start. I
Sure.
have one in the chat that says, could you answer question Q&A about October 5th? Did you send that to me to
I
answer?
sent that to you. So that was one of the ones that the person had to step away, and we had already discussed this, but if a tenant is on a month-to-month lease, can you serve the 30-day notice to terminate in the middle of the month with the lease expiring in the middle of the next month? Or
Well,
so
I will repeat, for legal advice, I think that all landlords should consult an attorney. We are not attorneys here, and we don't know the letter of the law. I will tell you, as far as OFA is concerned, on payments under the HAP contract, that as long as the tenant is living in the unit and the unit meets housing quality standards, it's not in abatement, or we haven't terminated the contract for non-compliance violations, then if you submit a non-renewal notice, we are going to issue the tenant a voucher if they're eligible to receive one, and we're going to terminate the contract when they move from the unit. If you need to get a tenant out of the unit, you have to enforce your lease, and you have to go through the court system and consult an attorney to do that. OFA cannot make a tenant move any more than you can. So you have to use the legal methods to do that. As far as when you give notice, you just need to send it in to OHFA. We will act upon that notice, giving the tenant a voucher if we can, and assist them in getting moved from your unit. If you do get judgment against a tenant, we will send them information about the judgment and send them through the hearing process if we need to. Not always are they given a voucher, but not always do we hold the voucher from them once they go through the hearing process. And that's confidential information we can't give to you, but we do follow the regulations and the policy to ensure that we take the tenant through the hearing process if they violate the family obligations or the lease. Hopefully that answers all those questions.
okay, this is just sent a notice of non-renewal to a tenant who is on a month-to-month lease in the middle of the month. And Robert Goldman advised us to send it for the 30-day to the middle of the next month, not the end of the month. He says there is no law stating it has to be at the end of the month.
Right. And I think that that's on assisted as well as unassisted. I think that depending on why the landlord needs the property or why they're doing a notice of non-renewal, they can ask them to vacate. They just need to adhere to whatever is in the lease that was signed when the unit was leased. And they need to go look at the Landlord Tenant Act, and then they need to consult an attorney if they have questions above that. Under OFA's policy, we will continue to pay as long as the tenant's living in the unit and the unit meets all housing quality standards.
This question is for Amanda, and it looks like she just dropped off, but we will make sure that she sees this question about assessing or inspecting the units available prior to putting us on the list, or a certain number of houses on your list. So I do have, Amanda has placed her information in the chat, but we will make sure that she gets this question as well. And then someone asked if the slides from this meeting will be sent out, and if not, how can we get a copy of them? Yes, this entire webinar is being recorded, and that will be placed on our website along with the slides for future reference. And then we will also be sending out a brief survey. Let's see. Just 3 years ago, we had 120 OFA tenants, and now we have 32. If there was an agency to help with mitigating the damages, or possibly a landlord liaison with OHFA, we might be willing to increase our number again. Just an idea.
What I would say to that is Mr. Love and I would be happy to discuss this with you further to see what the ideas are. We would like to continue to do outreach and education to our clients. Many of our tenants, they don't have a good education or understanding about how to rent properties, how to take care of properties. And so it's not just about housing, but it's about the housing experience. And so a lot of our families need education. And so if you have some ideas, Ken and I would love to speak with you about that.
Okay, if tenants have difficulty paying for their portion of the rent, in what situations, or what is the eligibility for tenants to be considered to receive 100% rent paid by OHFA?
So HUD has a regulatory requirement of families paying 30% of their income towards their rent. And they have restrictions on what's counted, what's not counted, what allowances we can give. And so if a family has earned or unearned income, we have to have verification and count that. If we're indicating that a tenant has the ability to pay $100 a month towards their rent, then they are responsible to pay that every month. If there is a loss of income, they need to report it. As soon as they report it, we verify it, and we will increase our portion of payment if we can. The other problem that comes in, though, is when landlords increase the rent on a person that's lived in their property, or a tenant rents a property that's larger than what they're eligible for. If they exceed that payment standard, then they are subjecting themselves to have to pay rent even if they have no income at all. And so in situations like that, OHFA can't help other than to give the tenant a voucher and allow them to move.
Thank you, Mary. We still have a few minutes before this session is over. If anyone has any other questions that they would like to place in the chat, or if any of the panelists have any information. Okay, if a tenant has lost income and they provide OFA proof of the adjustment, what is the timeline for OHFA to make the change to their portion? Can you backdate the assistance?
Okay, what our policy is once a tenant reports it, we will make it effective the first of the month after everything is verified. So we try to educate our families on everything that we need to verify so that when they send the change in, it has everything with it. And it will be effective the first of the month after they report it. Unfortunately, some of our families just send us a little post-it note and say, hey, I lost my job, and they don't send anything else with it. And so it may take us couple of weeks, a month to get the information that we need to verify it. We try to always be considerate of, what the circumstances are, and we try to get those processed as quickly as possible. I will tell you that over the last 6 to 9 months, OHFA has been going through rebuilding phases. We started new programs and lost staff to those new programs. And so we've had many new specialists come on board, going through training. And so we've been a little delayed on some of our processing, but we are trying to get that back under control. Normally, we would say anywhere between 10 days and 30 days, you should have a response to anything that you've sent into the agency.
After a tenant has been evicted, who do they contact at OHFA for consideration for a voucher? What are the steps?
If we have a family on the program, they should always contact their caseworker. So we work by teams, and we go by the tenant's last name to assign a caseworker. So if they call in, anyone should be able to answer their question, but everybody does have a caseworker that they can speak with. If they don't feel like they're getting adequate response, they can always request to speak to a supervisor or a manager.
Any other questions or observations from our panelists that you would like to share?
There was something shared in the chat that I want to reiterate, is that when landlords receive direct deposit of funds or a check from OHFA regarding HAP, you are indicating to OHFA that the tenant is living in the unit and that the unit meets housing quality standards. And so if you know of a tenant that is not living in the unit, please advise us immediately so that we can start investigating that. Gwen gave the information to our investigator, which is Stacy Golson, and her contact information is 405-419-8274. And you can report any abuse or fraud, and we will investigate. You will not always know what the response is to that.
We have a question. Thank you all for this webinar. It has been helpful. Well, thank you all for attending.
Yes.
One last question. I have noticed that we receive some correspondence by portal and some through the mail. Is there a policy about what type is sent to my mail or portal? It gets hard to keep up with.
I will apologize for that. We are working on that to become more consistent. Some people, I understand we have schedulers that send mail out for appointment letters. We have specialists that are sending letters out. We have administrative staff that send stuff out. Some people do it to the portal, some people do not. We hope to get everything through the portal eventually. There are some forms that we cannot send through the portal. So if we have to send that by mail, we also send the letter with the form by mail. If you ever have any questions as to what is being sent by mail or by portal, you can always ask the finance staff that you contact or any of these managers here on the panel today. And we'll try and answer all your questions.
Just to follow up on that, Mary, one of the things in preparing for this meeting, I would suggest that landlords make sure that you have your email address up to date. Where do they do that? Can they do that through the portal, or where is that done?
We try to keep everything in the files. So if it's a landlord wanting to ensure that their email address is updated, they can send it through their portal. They can put it in writing to the rental HAP staff. Their email address is rentalhapstaff@ohfa.org. I believe you've posted that in the chat.
Yeah, there's
prior.
no staff, it's just rental HAP.
Rental
just
Hap
rental
Group
hap at OHFA. And we will, in the future, we hope to do blast outs by email to our landlords. And we also send a lot of the information and do post on the portal. So you can always look there.
And I would also suggest looking on our social media. I would be remiss as the social media manager if I didn't mention that. We do provide quite a few updates. So please follow, like, and share those. And then also a lot of the information that we've shared today is on our website. This whole presentation, to reiterate, will be placed on our website along with the PowerPoints that were shared today. And then we will make sure that you have the contact information to get in touch with our staff that you need. So I am going to open it up. We're at 12:15, but if anyone else has any questions, we can answer those real quick. Is there a way to change the username on the portal?
I'm
Can
getting
you
there. Yeah,
repeat the
the portal problems for the landlords, you're basically gonna need to call me, and I left my phone number over there. I'm listed. I have to give you a temporary password to get you back in. I cannot change the username that you have or someone has, set it up under, but I will log on to the assistance check administrative site and change your temporary password so that you can get in and reset it. That happens a lot of times when you've had a little manager and she gets fired, she quits, she walks away, and she was the only one who was in there and pulling the information. So again, the HAPCheck.com is where your money is going to be and be posted. You have to verify that that went to your bank account if you're direct deposit. Make sure there weren't any mistakes. We usually call you if anything comes back to us. But on the portal, to get reassigned for it, I have to actually totally walk you back through as a temporary little password so you can reset it and get a new email address identified if you need to change the email address with that.
Anything else? Any more questions? Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to all of our panelists, both the OHFA staff and the outside panelists that we invited today. It's been a great morning with lots of information. So thank you all, and we will look forward to meeting you for future training opportunities.